Chapter 81. Draco Meteor. I roared out in delight, cackling madly as the energy roared up into the sky, and my opponent's face took on a colored hue as the energy sent a warm glow across the stands. Then it exploded like a firework. "Hide from me, will you? Golem!" he cried out, but hiding underground in the grass field wasn't going to work. "Let's see you dig your way out of this one. Mwahahaha." I cackled as the energy bombs hit the ground and everything exploded, cratering massive chunks out of the grass field. As the smoke cleared, I nodded satisfied. The grass field was pretty loose. The ground was almost soft. It was something I had noticed when the opponent's golem had landed on the field and sunken a bit. It made for easy dig escapes, but it also meant the ground wasn't strong enough to protect against a powerful enough attack. When the dust and grass floating through the air cleared, the golem was revealed in the bottom of a crater, completely knocked out. Golem can no longer battle. Winner is Victoria Ferrous. The announcer called out, and I cheered as Dragonite roared at her victory. I laughed as I, instead of leaving, released Milotic onto the field, who instantly pounced onto his wife, and the two quickly tangled together as Dragonite grabbed him and spun around in delight. Heh. It was funny my Pokemon hadn't really cared about gym matches that much. Sure, they still delighted in victories, but I had explained to them all what the conference was, and how big of a deal it was, and it was pretty amazing how seriously they were taking it. They weren't just fighting because I wanted, but because they did, and more importantly, I jumped off and laughed as Dragonite caught me and dragged me into the spin as she mushed me and Milotic together in a spin cycle. They were actually having fun. It wasn't just Arcanine, who always wanted more battles, because she was a battle maniac. Dragonite was actually seriously enjoying the battle. Blue Heart, of course, was always serious when I asked him for something, but my team was actually enjoying themselves. It made me happy that my Pokemon were happy. "Vicky!" a voice called out, and while Dragonite stopped spinning for a bit, the world didn't. "Wha? Ivy?" I asked, confused, as the entire world continued spinning around and around. "Die Izzy. Get off the arena." Ivy yelled at me from the stands, and I realized that they would need to fix up the arena before the next match. I reached up and just laughed while scratching the back of my head. Yeah, she didn't accept that, and I hurried my friends off the arena so the maintenance worker team could get to work. Dragonite set me down and I stumbled around a bit before the world stopped spinning, and I returned my two friends so I could run off the stage. All the stands were erupting in cheers at the explosive ending. Leaving the arena was turning into an experience. "There she is!" voices called out as Ivy pushed me along, literally pushing at my back as if I would run back to the arena grounds the moment she stopped. "Ignore them," Ivy demanded, and I just nodded along as the crowds pointed me out and loud whispers washed over me. I was getting sort of famous. "Don't worry, Vicky. It'll pass. Conference trainers are always very popular while it's happening," Bugsy offered, and I just smiled and threw him a thumbs up. It was a little discomforting for sure, but it wasn't that bad really. People weren't rushing up to invade my personal space or anything. Kanto was pretty respectful, so it wasn't bad. No, the problem was as we came out onto the main street and walked along, some televisions were playing in shop windows, and I could look up and see my own face. The Star Badge battles had gotten out of course, but the fact I had just completely demolished the previous records meant that the news was talking about it. I was pushed past by Ivy, but I caught glimpses of my battle with Claire in one of the windows. Cut in with the match we literally just left with Dragonite blowing up the grass arena. That hadn't taken long, geez. Then again, I shouldn't be surprised. There weren't as many sports teams in the world. There were baseball teams, sure, but well, let's just say the leagues for human sports took a pretty hefty back seat to Pokemon battles. The sports channel on TV wasn't human sports, but Pokemon battles for nearly all their broadcast time. "Food time," Ivy demanded at me, and I just laughed. Ivy got hangry when she was hungry. But before we got to the little cafe that Ivy had decided was the cutest place ever, a voice called out. "There she is. Hey kid." The noise was loud enough to cut through the noise down the street, and I turned and then felt my face split into a grin. A familiar old man with a booming voice, and a few older people all sitting at an outdoor cafe. But they were all people I recognized. Suddenly Ivy wasn't pushing me, as I ran forward until I hit the cafe's little terrace and plopped my arms up on it so I could look over the banister. "Hey! It's good to see you." I greeted them and the old man just laughed in a rumble. "Better to see you, kid." Matthew rumbled. Matthew was the old man from Pallet Town that had the Alpha Nidoking. And I looked around and noticed other familiar faces. "Midori Abakan." I greeted and she sent me a look at that. "It's Midori Wunchin." She huffed at me, but was immediately teased by the others for trying to act like a young one again. "Vicky? Ivy? Bugsy? Come meet everyone," I called out. "This is the crew from Pallet Town." I ran through there on my way to fight Blaine and battled Matthew and his Nidoking. It was an amazing fight. "Huh. If poor King wasn't so old, we'd have thrashed you, girl," he said with a wink, but was instantly elbowed a bit by his wife next to him. "You lost fair and square, dear," he grumbled, and I just laughed at the obvious affection between them all. "Oh. I never traveled through Pallet." Ivy Vinewood of Viridian City. She greeted the group with a little polite bow and got some smiles from the older women. "Bugsy of Azalea Town." Bugsy introduced himself, and the atmosphere shifted a bit. Matthew now had a grumpy frown on his face, and I had to roll my eyes at the old-timers. "Bugsy's cool. He helped me while I traveled through Johto," I explained and gave the old-timers a pout. "Be nice." "Well, if he helped you, then he can't be that bad," Midori offered, but it was pretty weak. I rolled my eyes at the old people. Heard you traveled through Johto." "Got the entire set of badges?" Matthew asked, without really sounding like a question. But I knew where his heart was. I grinned as I reached into my bag and pulled out my badge case. Then I flipped it open and showed it off. "Well, look at that." Midori was the first to speak in a shocked tone, and then Matthew started laughing deep and happy. "Look at this kid," he said, smiling bright and happy. "Kanto through and through." I rolled my eyes with a smile, and glanced back at Bugsy, giving him an apologetic look. He just shrugged his shoulders, to show he wasn't bothered. I guess he was used to old-timers too. "Heh. See you, old grump, I knew we were right to get those tickets," Midori added after a bit of the old people cheering on at the sight of my badges. "I didn't say we shouldn't either." "Don't listen to him, Vicky, dear. He grumped the whole way up the mountain." "I don't like it, is all. Worth it this year at least." He explained himself a little embarrassed, and I just smiled a bit. "Want Blissey to look you over? Her healing pulse is pretty good for aches and pains." "Bah. I'm fine," he grumbled, but then he blinked and looked at me. "That Chansey of yours evolved? The one that lifted King?" "Yep. We fought Chuck, the fighting gym leader from Dash." "I know that old bastard. I mean, I know the man," Matthew said with a glint in his eye that told me he had probably fought Chuck more than once. And then I remembered that Matthew had said he used to be the gym leader of a fighting-type gym in Kanto. "Oh. That's right. Fighting-type rivals," I said, and Matthew instantly scoffed. "Rivals? With that blockhead? Never. I won every time we ever faced each other." "Don't listen to him, dear," Matthew always got in a grump whenever another fighting-type trainer came around. Matthew's wife offered, calmly sipping her tea. "Hee hee." I laughed, because it was so funny how the old woman was just throwing her husband under the bus. "Woman." He grunted at her, but that only earned him a smile. Ah, they were in love. Well, Chansey fought Chuck's entire team. And when she won, the two of us were finally synced up. She realized that I believed in her, and she saw me as a trainer and friend and not just the kid she was taking care of. I said, laughing. Chansey had never said any of this, but I had understood the way she treated me very well. "Oh yeah? Yep. Chansey is a friendship evolution. The moment our friendship together solidified and forged in battle, she evolved into Blissey." "Huh." The old man grunted, neither positive or negative, just taking in the information. "Oh dear, you have to let her out. Your Chansey was a doll, and I would love to see her again, and to see a Blissey." Midori asked and I nodded, grabbing her ball, and a moment later Blissey was there. Blinking a bit until she recognized the group and then waving happily. "Bliss," she offered, and I could hear the air sucked into Midori's lungs as she gasped. "Oh my. Your Chansey was always so lovely, but I've never seen anything like this. Your Blissey is simply gorgeous." Blissey flushed happily at the words and waved her fin at the woman, a little embarrassed. Midori actually rose up and walked out of the little terrace they had been sitting in and came out to the street to look at Blissey. Blissey, despite her actions, was obviously enjoying the attention, and I looked over to Ivy and Bugsy and rolled my eyes. Finally, after a few minutes of Midori gushing over Blissey, who was soaking up the attention, the older woman realized everyone was just sort of looking at her. "Oh," she said, and then blushed herself a little. "Look at me, taking up so much attention. Really? Vicky, you delightful girl, we'll be here for the rest of the conference. I'm sure you'll see us all cheering you from the stands, but don't let us keep you," she offered, and I just nodded. Yeah, Ivy is going to kill me if we don't get her fed soon. "Vicky! Hee hee hee." I cackled and started running as Ivy chased me, and I delighted in her shouts to stop running and stop telling lies. This just got a little complicated. It was time to find out my next opponent. The screen was locked onto the ice arena, and then, my fourth round, in the ice arena. My opponent this time wasn't a random. Victoria Ferrous versus Elizabeth Ferris. I winced at the words that were told to me, and I nodded. Yep, this was going to cause issues. I turned and hurried away. I should probably talk to Graham. This could get shit too late. Vicky. Elizabeth was there standing tall in front of me, and I winced. She was like me wearing trainer equipment, and she looked like a mature elite trainer, but her face was serious. Like super duper serious. "Elizabeth. I've watched your gym battles. And I've watched your battles here in the conference. Dash. You're strong. But I've fought strong trainers before. I don't care how strong you are. I won't lose. If I can beat you here, then no one can argue my place as the heir. I'm going to be going at you with everything I have." I opened my mouth to say something, but instead closed it. Deep breath. Time to be serious. I won't lose either. Not because I want to be the heir, I don't. But I assure you, Elizabeth, I'll be taking you very seriously. Come at me with everything, and if you win, then good. Either way, I look forward to the battle. She stared at me for a long while, before turning and walking away. Yikes. This was going to get awkward. Now to find Graham. I ran off. I'd find my friends later. Right now, it was serious. Rushing back to the hotel, I found Graham, but she wasn't alone. Drinking coffee with Uncle Leo, the two of them looked up as I walked in. I opened my mouth and closed it, and then opened it again, firm on what I had to say. My next match is going to be against Elizabeth, I said, and Uncle Leo twitched, and I could see Graham's face fall a bit. I see. She offered, and yeah, that was a tension in the air as Uncle Leo looked away out the window and neither seemed to want to speak. Yeah, I said, and then walked over. The table had some fancy coffee stuff arrayed on it, and I settled into an empty space and grabbed one of the cups. With a little work, the carafe of coffee filled a little cup and I took a sip. Yep. I still hated coffee black. Time to white girl up this bitch. Ignoring the two adults, I grabbed some milk and sugar and started pouring enough in that the coffee was a creamy color. That's better, I said, and Graham seemed to finally notice what I was doing. You shouldn't drink coffee, dear. It'll stunt your growth. I mumbled, but continued to sip anyway. Elizabeth will fight well, Uncle Leo finally said, and I grimaced. She confronted me when the machine decided our match. Said she wouldn't lose. That she was going to be heir. I explained, and Graham scowled, looking at Uncle Leo, who once again looked away, this time not in thought, but in embarrassment. Fool. You should already know that isn't up for debate. Elizabeth is competitive. He defended himself. Yes, I wonder where she got that from. Faye. Graham said, And even Uncle Leo, to my surprise, looked gram dead in the eyes and just lifted an eyebrow at her. The fact she actually flushed a little and looked away first was pretty funny. Heh. Family. I don't really know how strong she is, I admitted, and both adults looked to me. But that. I'm not going to lose. I can't. Not until I'm face to face with Lance. Not until he takes back his words. I mean, he sorta already did, but I need to rub his face in it a little, you know? I offered my sudden drive to win, dying a little since it wasn't as big a deal anymore, but I didn't want to admit it, but I liked winning. I liked the idea of being an amazing Pokemon battler. Not more than I loved hugging my Pokemon, but still pretty high up there. I know, child. Gram said, reaching out and dropping a hand on my shoulder. I'm proud of you. And Elizabeth. But this is a competition, and sometimes this happens. Fight well. Win if you can, and we'll deal with the rest after. Elizabeth will fight hard. Uncle Leo said simply. I slurped up my coffee a bit after that. It was still awkward, but at least it wouldn't be a surprise. This still sucked though. Richard Brushfire. Chief of Kanto Ecology for the League. He breathed in and sighed out in relief. Smoke. I figured I'd find you out here. A familiar voice greeted him, and Richard slumped, a familiar female voice. The Department of Ecology has no official comment on anything right now. Please Sue Dash. Don't give me that. Dick. The voice called, and his space was suddenly invaded. Melanie. He grunted, but didn't pull away when she reached up and snagged his cigarette out from between his lips to take a drag. Dick. She purred back, and Richard knew this was going to be trouble. I'm not helping you. You don't even know what I want. She argued, but Richard wasn't stupid. Victoria Ferrous. He said bluntly, and her smile widened. Okay, so maybe you do know what I want. Give me the scoop, Dick, come on. Not a chance. I don't know anything, and if I did, I wouldn't talk about it. Bullshit. I remember you complaining about the Milotic thing, and now I hear a rumor that Lance, the champion, thanked you for introducing you to the girl? Spill, mister. She demanded, and then she exhaled, and smoke flowed out over his lips. Damn it. I don't have much if anything to share. But you do in fact have something. I've heard all sorts of rumors. So just confirm them for me. The girl, did she train her own Pokemon, or is this a family assault? Dick rolled his eyes. Family assaults were rare, and almost never worked. You could give your kid the most powerful Pokemon you wanted, but there was a point where only a good trainer would bring out their strength. The girl trained her own Pokemon. Surely the fact she earned a title as Dragon Master would have told you that. Now give me my cigarette back. No, it's sexier on me. She said, staring up at him with those warm brown eyes that Richard knew he was going to get in trouble for once again. So the title, it's legit? There's all sorts of hearsay about it. Legit. ALD Blackthorn himself sent the promotion. You know I can't offer anything off the record, Melanie. But the girl is the real thing. I'm not sure I believe that. She said then, pulling away, and Richard already missed the warmth. And his damn cigarette. What do you want? The truth. A 10-year-old that can get every star badge in Kanto and Johto in her first year? It's something out of a historical epic. It doesn't make sense. It happens. Even Lance was a prodigy. Yes, Lance is a prodigy, and she's already broken all of his records. What does that tell you? She snapped at him, her back turning on him as she started pacing. Damn it. She was fully back to being a bitch. Damn her hot and cold shit. But when she was hot, she was certainly. He shook it off, and realizing he wasn't getting his cigarette back, he reached for his pack. The kid's from Viridian, right? She asked, and Richard already knew this was a bad idea. She is. Then you'd know what her address, dash. Not a chance. Oh fuck off, you overprotective oaf. She hissed at him, stalking back up and glaring up at him. I don't care about her home. It would be stupid to show up there, but if she lived in Viridian, she went to school in Viridian. And you want to interview her teachers? And I want to interview her teachers, she said sultry and devilish, as she once more pressed herself against him. I can't tell you, he was cut off, as she leaned up and pressed her burning cigarette against his unlit one, and for a moment the two of them were staring into each other's eyes, and Richard was pretty sure his cigarette was going to catch fire and never stop burning. Damn it. I never told you. You never told me, Dick. The words left his lips, and then she was gone. The warmth that had been right there once more replaced with cold. Fuck. He exhaled smoke that tasted warmer than normal and just hoped his bosses didn't find out. Chapter 82. We got quite a battle today, folks. A family feud. Elizabeth Ferrous, a returning contender aiming for the top this year, and her younger cousin. Victoria Ferrous, the trainer of the first flying Gyarados, and our very own Dragon master. I winced a bit at the obvious focus I was getting over my competitor. But that was that, and this was this. I stepped out onto the field and up the little challenger's podium. The ice field. As I looked over the field, there was Elizabeth, just like me. She was dressed up in her tournament clothes. She looked like an ace trainer. Her clothing was expensive sports gear. But it was her eyes that told me this was going to be painful. She was completely serious and ready to fight for a win. Trainers, release your first Pokemon. The announcer called out, and I grabbed a specific white Pokeball and threw it. Elizabeth's ball reached the arena first and burst open, and I wasn't surprised to see her partner. A Delcatty. Not a surprise from the Ferris clan and their love of cat-like Pokemon. The announcer quickly called out, but only a moment later appeared my partner. Meathii. Milotic roared out as he stretched out and then loomed over the much smaller Delcatty. Match begin. Rush her down. I roared out, and Elizabeth responded. Dodge it. Elizabeth called out in return, and Delcatty focused on that. Even as Milotic rushed forward, the ice not slowing him down at all, as he curled up and slammed his tail fin down, the glow of his fin telling me he was using Iron Tail. The ice exploded from his blow even so. Shards of ice shot up, but it didn't hit. Delcatty jumped, and twisted, and dodged the first strike, with some aerial maneuvers that impressed me. But just dodging once wasn't enough. Milotic had learned how to control his strikes and keep the attack going from Zealous after all. He continued attacking, his tail lashing out, forcing Delcatty to twist and spin. But it was the third swipe that surprised me. Delcatty landed on Milotic's tail and used it to bounce far into the sky. This was planned. I smirked as despite the cold of the ice field, the air suddenly heated up as sunny day cleared out every hint of clouds. Milotic actually flinched a bit from looking upwards as the sun grew bright. Milotic. Don't chase. Prep. I called out, and he did just that. Curling in on himself, energy seeped out of him as he used Coil. Delcatty finally landed back on the ice, and to my surprise, despite the slick ice, she landed solidly. Did she use her claws to dig in? Or some other trick to stick? Now Delcatty. We're going all out. Elizabeth called out, and I smirked as suddenly the plan all came together. Delcatty's tail lit up, drawing in power instantly, and suddenly a solar beam rocketed forward. Dig. I called out, and considering that the ice below Milotic wasn't the usual hard-packed earth he needed to use water to dig up, he spun, and used the same crack he had used when he smashed the ice to slam down through the ice into the water underneath. The solar beam passed over where he had been, leaving a stream of water boiling off from the heat. Delcatty. Use the time. Elizabeth called out, and I nodded as Delcatty obviously started preparing some trick. Then Milotic decided to be tricksy. Suddenly from below the ice a rumble started, and then a burst of water and sound blasted through where Delcatty had been. She jumped at the exact moment the rumble started and so escaped from the water pulse that shattered ice. I see. Milotic thought he could pull a Zealous. What a smart boy. The cat and mouse game started for a bit, double funny that it was a fish and cat game. Milotic continued to attack from under the ice, and while Elizabeth was using the time to try and buff up Delcatty, there was a problem. The entire arena started to break apart. Gyarados hadn't cared when his opponent had turned the water to ice, and Milotic didn't care that the arena was ice to start, he was turning it into water. Breaking up the ice, the once solid arena was soon floating in sections, making the entire thing more slippery, and more dangerous for Delcatty. "Okay, Delcatty. Get him," Elizabeth called out, and I watched as her tail once more started glowing. And then surging. And powerful solar beams started smashing back down into the ice as Delcatty jumped around. It was funny, but both Pokémon were blasting the other with beams, and I could hear the audience delight in the light show. But the battle had already been decided, and I felt bad for Elizabeth. Milotic was my partner. My first Pokémon. There was no way I would let him be the first of my Pokémon to lose. I had come up with this plan since I already knew the ice arena would be next. It was just bad luck that Elizabeth was facing it. Suddenly Milotic stopped attacking back, and Delcatty's solar beams continued shooting down into the water for a while longer before Elizabeth called for a stop. "Folks, the battle of blasts has finally gone quiet. Did a lucky solar beam take out the beautiful Milotic? Is this the end of trainer Victoria's perfect record through this conference?" But Elizabeth didn't look at all like she expected that to be what happened. And then I felt it. A rumble ran through the area, water shifting. Delcatty suddenly meowed at Elizabeth. "Delcatty, keep your feet, get ready to block it," she called out, but while that was a good guess, it wasn't right. The water shifted, beginning to surge up and over the limits of the ice arena. The smaller chunks of ice, now completely broken apart, surged over the edge and flowed away, destroying even more landing area for Delcatty, and then it was over. The whole area shuddered and Delcatty cried out as it went flying. The ice block it had been resting on had just been shattered with a brutal iron tail. And then Milotic once more disappeared. "Don't think you can hide forever then," Elizabeth cried out, obviously angry. "Delcatty, flash!" she roared, and I blinked and looked away, as Delcatty suddenly became a massive beacon of light that I had to flinch against even while I looked away. "There!" Elizabeth cried out, and only once I looked back did I get it. Elizabeth had used the flash to light up the bottom of the arena so that even Milotic couldn't hide within the water. Smart. Kaadi. A solar beam burst down into the water and crashed into Milotic. And then it popped as if he was never there. "Substitute," I called out calmly. Milotic hadn't just been blasting the arena into pieces. He had been preparing for a full sweep. A substitute was just a useful move to always have active if you could, in case you were going to take a massive hit, like a powered-up solar beam. Milotic didn't like training. Unlike Arcanine, who just blasted forward and used her overwhelming strength to win, he preferred it his own way. He hid away, powered himself up so he could win the whole battle without really tiring himself out. He was a lazy fish after all. Delcatty landed back on another chunk of ice, and it was obvious Elizabeth was going to try her flash trick again, but Milotic struck first. Another iron tail smashed into the ice she was on and sent the cat flying high into the sky. "Milotic, go!" I called out loud enough for him to hear, and even as Delcatty shot another solar beam into the pool where she had just been, everything exploded. Extreme speed was a difficult move for Milotic to use. At least it was when he was on the ground. Put him in water though? The arena erupted into a spout of water and no one could even see what had happened, even as Delcatty's solar beam blasted a hole through the water revealing nothing. And then it was over. Because above Delcatty, looming over her, and cutting her off from the sun, was Milotic. And then he struck. A tail covered in water came crashing down and Delcatty was smashed. Then she vanished in a puff of smoke. "Substitute," Elizabeth called out, in the same tone I had used before. I felt a smile spread across my face as she spoke. Because while it was mocking, the look on her face as she looked up at Milotic was anything but. As he floated for a moment in the sky, it revealed he was prepared. Aqua Ring floated around him, healing him constantly, and he had the rippling colors of energy floating over his scales, making them appear even more rainbow-like than normal. Milotic was fully buffed up. "Milotic, go!" I roared once more as Delcatty appeared on the ice, her substitute having ended as she appeared normally once more, and even as Elizabeth responded, it wasn't enough. Milotic shot down, and it was only a solid wall of energy that appeared in front of Delcatty that kept her in the arena, as another aqua tail smashed down so strongly that it rang out on the shield like a gong. Protect wasn't going to save her. That only delayed the inevitable. A moment later, another strike, and Delcatty cried out for half a second as she once more puffed into smoke. Another substitute? I see. Solar beam. Milotic turned and grunted as he was met face first with a blast of energy. To my relief, it wasn't enough. His head turned to the side at the attack, and when it was over, he shifted enough to lock his massive eye back on the cat. Then he surged forward, and this game of fish and cat was over. Substitute and protect only delayed the inevitable, as Delcatty simply couldn't use substitute enough to survive Milotic's rampage. And it was a rampage. He didn't like battling, so making the battle last longer was doing nothing for his temper. And finally, Delcatty had nothing else to give, and an aqua tail smashed her into the water with a massive plume erupting where she disappeared. When it settled, the poor cat was floating in the water unconscious, and Elizabeth returned her partner, with shaking hands. She had 2 more Pokemon. She had to send them out onto an arena that was now smashed apart and mostly water. Facing a fully buffed up Milotic, who was pissed and ready for anything she did. The match was over. We both knew that. Our eyes met across the battlefield. I nodded at her then. Not to embarrass her, but because I respected what she had done with Delcatty. If we had a more solid ground arena, well, she still would have lost, but it would have been even more even. She had lost to the same moves I had used for Milotic to fight against Koga. There wasn't any shame in being overwhelmed like that. But it didn't mean that Elizabeth was just going to hand me the win either. Go. Vaporeon. She called out and released her next Pokemon, and I nodded. A good choice considering the arena. And so the match continued. I hesitated before deciding to walk into the lockers anyways. Normally I wouldn't go to my opponent's lockers after a match, but this was different. As I entered, I felt myself wince as I heard the muffled crying. Elizabeth had put up a hell of a fight. It just didn't matter in the end. Powered up Milotic was OP. My fishy boy just didn't care about taking damage, or anything by that point. He could recover through it. So Elizabeth's team had been crushed. But I wasn't going to let it end like that. She wasn't just some random competitor. She was family. Sort of. No, she was. She had helped the Gummy. Had taken care of the Milotic when I wasn't around. She deserved to be treated like actual family. I stepped farther in and found her sitting on the bench, her head in her hands, as she muffled her cries into a towel. You were amazing. I started off, because I didn't know how else to get the conversation started. Her shoulders hitched, and then she snapped at me. Go away. No, I responded back and stepped forward. You were amazing. I said again, and then just to solidify the point, I sat next to her on the bench. I said, go away. I don't want to deal with you. I know. Losing sucks. I agreed my own loss against Koga had sucked. Even if it was necessary. Why are you here? Just to mock me? Prove you're the better one? She hissed into her towel. I just shook my head, as I kicked my feet a bit. I'm not better than you, Elizabeth. I denied, but she hiccuped up a laugh in return. You beat me. I know things you don't. That's all. You fought me so hard it was crazy. I lost. I lost against a kid in her first year as a trainer. I've had Milotic for years, and Arcanine for a while too. You know what I mean. She got angry again, snapping at me. Yeah. I know what you mean. I agreed. You know. You never asked me how my Pokemon are so strong. I mentioned, and she twitched a bit. Family secret. She muttered bitterly, and I nodded despite her not being able to see it. Yeah, that's true. It's a stupid family secret, like so much other stuff. Stuff I would rather just share. Like Milotic or lots of other stuff. But you know, you're family too. The room was quiet for a long while before Elizabeth scoffed. We aren't family. We're strangers. Our fathers hate each other. Don't say that around Gram. She'd smack your butt. She once more scoffed. You know what I mean. We take care of your Milotic and benefit from it. I know the secret obviously, but that's that, and that's all we know. Yeah. I knew it would get out eventually. Just like I think all the secrets will. Eventually. I said, and I felt a grin spreading across my cheeks, because I was getting ideas about those secrets to start with. But like you said, that's that. And this is this. I beat you today. But tomorrow? Or next time? Ask me when you're ready. Ask you what? How to get strong. I said frankly, and then I just walked away. She did need time. But I didn't want her to think this was some stupid competition. Well, I mean, other than the conference. If she wanted to be the heir to the clan, good. That meant I wouldn't even be in the consideration, all the better for me. No. I had no interest in that. Ivy Vinewood. Finally, her opponent's Pokemon went down. Ivy was breathing hard, despite the fact she wasn't the one battling. No, it was her Pokemon, but she was now down to one last Pokemon, and all her tricks hadn't worked. Her opponent was strong. Really strong, and Ivy was being pushed back. The boy across from her had the easy confidence of being in the arena before. She had done a bit of research. This was his 7th conference, and it showed. Ivy had been on the back foot from the start. All because her opponent had been ready for her tricks. She felt like this was her limit. It made her want to cry. To think that all her work so far would end here, before she even made it out of the preliminary arena. Moo. Tauros called out, and Ivy blinked the tears out of her eyes to see Tauros looking up at her. There wasn't any worry in his eyes, Tauros. He was her friend. They'd met in the safari zone, and in the end Ivy hadn't even needed a safari ball to catch him. And Evan sends out a mock amp. A brutal type disadvantage for Vinewood. Will she be able to pull off a surprise win? The announcer spoke, and Ivy winced, because... yeah, that was probably the end. Tauros was already tired, and a fighting type was his weakness. But once he looked towards his opponent, he planted his hooves and mooed out a warning. Woo. Ivy. Kick his butt. A voice held out from behind her, and she almost flinched and looked, but then relaxed. Stupid Vicky. She shouldn't yell so loud. Mock amp. Close combat. The battle was on. No time to think about anything else. But this match wasn't over. Zen headbutt. She called out just in time to get Tauros ready. She might lose, but she would lose fighting. I really didn't want this to be a common thing. I entered into the locker room, and to my surprise I didn't hear tears. Ivy? I'm over here, Vicky. Ivy called out, and I walked in to see her surrounded by her Pokemon. Venusaur almost didn't fit, but they all squished together. And Ivy was using potion to spray over all of them, and seemingly taking care of him herself. Her eyes were a little blurry, but she wasn't crying. It's funny, but I think I had the words to share this time, and they were the same ones I had used before. You were amazing. I lost. She offered, but I walked over and settled in next to Phantom, who blinked up at me. And then crawled onto my lap as I settled him in. So? Does losing make you any less amazing? Everyone loses. You don't. She grumbled, but it wasn't bitter, but more teasing. Koga kicked my butt. I said, and Ivy looked up in shock. What? When? The first time I faced him. I was relying entirely on my Pokemon's strength, and I wasn't preparing for the battle well enough. He beat me up, and then I studied under him as a gym trainer for a while. I beat him on the rematch. Huh. Is that why Kiba always mentioned you being a ninja? I'm afraid to say I know nothing about the protector of the moon, glorious beautiful Kunoichi Nike. But I did hear she kicked Kiba's ass. I said, fighting off a smirk. Vicky, you're such a... You. Ivy finally said with a sigh before focusing once more on Clefairy, who was laying in Ivy's lap looking pretty roughed up still. Although I noticed the little pink Pokemon was mostly faking the extent of its injuries, even swooning in Ivy's lap to get extra attention. You'll do even better next time. I said, and Ivy shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. I'm not sure I'll be very focused on the conference next year. I want to try and spread around some of the new moves that Fomantis and Phantom bring to the Bulbasaurs for next year. And do some breeding. She explained as she squirted a bit of potion onto Clefairy's chin, making the pink Pokemon blow a raspberry as some got in her mouth. I said because I actually understood. Would I show up next year for the conference? Would I go through the gym circuit again? I mean, I liked battling, I loved Pokemon, but more importantly, I loved being with them more than I cared for the sound of battle. You'll be amazing no matter what you do, I decided instead, and she laughed, sending me a look that didn't have nearly as much tears in her eyes anymore. Look in the mirror, Vicky. You're going to win the whole conference. Maybe. I demurred, but Ivy shook her head. The trainer I fought. He was strong. Super strong. I looked into him before our match. He had 7 conference showings. Vicky, I fought him hard, and lost. But I fought you too, you know? When you face him, you'll beat him. Ivy sat up, and wiped a hand through her green hair, her leaf beret on the bench beside her. Forget about me, I said, waving my hand. You fought so well. Everyone is going to remember you. Ivy sent me a look and then rolled her eyes. I've got most of them taken care of. Do you think Blissey would look them over? Sure. Of course. Not going to a Pokemon Center? Are you kidding? They're packed right now, Vicky. There was even a fake Pokemon Center that got busted the other night. Ivy said, and I blinked at that. Ballsy to do something like that during the conference. Wait, wasn't that an Ash thing? Team Rocket again, I think. Huh. Sure, Blissey can look over your friends, and then we need to go find your family. I'm sure they want to celebrate, I said, and Ivy flushed and looked away at the idea of celebrating her loss, but that's just how it was. This was Kanto after all. Chapter 83. The battle I was watching was interesting. The boy that had beaten Ivy was confidently taking apart another contestant. The girl was a few years older than us, but she was doing way worse than Ivy had against him. He had some serious skills. Exciting, isn't it? Ivy asked, as she was to my surprise not bothered by the boy, although she was paying more attention to the crowd. We were in the large main arena. This was it. Everyone that had fought now 4 wins under their belt and were facing the first round inside the main arena. The crowds had practically quadrupled since yesterday. The streets were packed, as more and more people were coming to the conference town. It made sense, while families might want to see their children fight, most people were just interested in the best of the best. I was honestly only barely paying attention to the boy that I wanted to crush if we fought. Because right after him was a match I was much more excited for. I hadn't seen Zealous much since the conference began. She had spent most of her time outside of the matches with her father. Apparently, from what little she had shared when I tracked her down, her father was hanging out with the Kanto and Johto representatives in their special box, which is where she spent most of the time. But more importantly, it was her fight up next. I was looking forward to cheering her on. My own match was practically the last one for the night, so I had plenty of time to relax and watch. Hey, there you are. A familiar voice called out, and I looked over to see Morty, and to my surprise, Jasmine. Oh, hi. Bugsy, who had been standing beside me, waved at the 2 fellow Johto gym leaders. I wasn't expecting to see you 2 here. Why not? It's always good to see what strong trainers are doing. Morty offered, and Jasmine nodded. To my surprise, she looked eyes with me and didn't quite glare, but when 2 trainers' eyes meet, a battle ensues. I told her, and she nodded, never breaking eye contact, but it was Morty who stopped that, reaching over and pulling Jasmine back a bit. Easy, you two, easy. This is the conference. If you want a rematch, Jasmine, you'll need to wait. She blinked and then sighed. I know. But don't think you'll beat Steelix so easily next time. I wouldn't think of it. You're a strong trainer, and I know next time we battle you'll be even stronger. It'll be fun. I confirmed, and she nodded slowly, then brightened a bit. I'll be challenging you again after this conference. Officially. She said, and I blinked and just smiled because Was there a difference between an unofficial match and an official one? Sounds fun. Good. Vicky. Look. Ivy called out and I smiled as the battle ended. The boy that defeated Ivy was continuing on, and then it would be Zealous up on stage. You wouldn't happen to have that ghost type of yours around, would you? Morty asked, pulling my eyes away from the post-battle cleanup. Oh. Mimikyu. That's right, you wanted to see him. Not with me, he's back home. Are you going to be around all day? I'm not going anywhere just yet. He offered, and Jasmine nodded. Well, next match is a friend of mine, so I want to watch it, but after that, how about I call home and get him transferred over? I'd like that. A new ghost type. I'm actually kind of excited. Morty chattered, his normally cool personality shattering a bit as he started asking me questions about Mimikyu. Heh. He was a ghost nerd, just like Bugsy was a bug nerd. No, Mimikyu pretend to be Pikachu, because they want to be loved. Are you sure? It seems like a hunting mechanic. Pretending to be something else, dash. That's not it. Really. Mimikyu want to be loved, because their ability makes them unable to really be seen. So they try their best to copy something well loved. I don't think Mimikyu is even a carnivore. Well, most ghosts are omnivores if anything. Morty added, muttering, and I nodded. Trust me, once you meet a Mimikyu, you'll understand them just fine. And we have a special battle today. The daughter of the Unovan diplomat here to see what Kanto has to offer. Zealous Bia. The announcer shouted and I stood up and screamed along with the cheering crowd. Woo! Zealous. Kick their ass. I yelled loud enough to get some looks, and Ivy even slammed an elbow into my side, but I was too excited to stop. The battle begun quickly, even if Zealous maybe didn't hear me. How sad. I wanted her to smile and wave at me for supporting her. But Zealous shocked the crowd by releasing Haxorus right off. Oh. Zealous wasn't going easy on her first fifth-round opponent. Zealous had crushed her opponent. It was actually pretty brutal. She hadn't shown any mercy, and Haxorus overwhelmed most of her opponents quickly with strong efficient attacks. It was super cool. But then I realized as I was rising that Ivy grabbed me and pointed, and I saw who was up next. Ash versus Richie. Oh. I considered it all. Ash would likely be super late. More than enough time to go grab Mimikyu if I wanted. But Ash right now would be desperately racing back after Team Rocket once more fucked with him. Even if he arrived, would he win? Likely not. So should I just let him have this moment of struggle to toughen him up, or would it benefit him at all? Should I instead just help? Would I even be able to find him? It's not like I knew which direction he went. I sighed as I stood up. I'll be back. What, but Ash is up next? Ivy demanded, and I smirked. I know, but he isn't here. See? I pointed out where Richie was coming up on the field, but even he looked confused when Ash wasn't there. Where's Ash? I'm not sure, but I'm going to look around a bit and see if there is some trouble. Morty, I'll be back when I can with Mimikyu, just stick to Ivy for now, okay? Sure. He offered, and then I definitely earned some surprise as I threw Dragonite's Pokeball onto a clear space and watched the crowd jerk back a bit at the appearance of the large Pokemon. Dragonite. Ash is missing, so we are going to look around a bit. I told her, and she blinked once her cute blue eyes, and then nodded. She was okay with helping people after all. I climbed on, and in a beat we were up and out of the stadium, ignoring the calls to not release Pokemon in the stadium. Where would Ash be? At least I had a few ideas. There had been a car chase or something, right? So they would be along the road. I pointed and Dragonite turned and we were off. Ash Ketchum. Hanging onto the handlebars of a bike while Pidgeotto worked hard to bring them just a little closer to the arena gave him a lot of time to think, even if that was the last thing he wanted. The sun was already setting, and that was his time for a match. Come on. Just a little farther, and he'd definitely see the arena. Huh, what's that? He blinked as he looked into the distance, towards the direction he was heading, and suddenly he gasped. That was a Pokemon. What was it? Not a Charizard, of course. What was it again? He would grab his Pokédex, but he wasn't balanced very well for that. Then as it got closer and closer, he noticed someone was actually riding it. A person. Help. He called out, unable to wave, and to his relief, they were coming right for him. Then as they got closer, he recognized that girl. It was Ivy's friend. Corey? Tori? Something like that, right? There you are, Ash. She cheered as her Pokemon flew right up to them. Want a lift? Yes. Thank you. Team Rocket Dash. Yeah, I figured it was those two. Come on, let's give your poor Pidgeotto a break. She's such a good girl though, isn't she? Ash nodded, but he was pretty sure Pidgeotto was a boy. Climb onto Dragonite. We need to get back, your match was about to start when I left. Oh no. He scrambled, nearly fell, but she managed to grab his hand and with an almost effortless pull, dragged him onto the Pokemon. Pidgeotto return. Alright Dragonite. Full speed back to the arena. She cheered, and then Ash yelped as he scrambled to get a grip on the girl as the wind suddenly ripped past their face. Fast. Super fast. Maybe he'd actually get there in time. Dragonite. That's right, he remembered that name. What a cool Pokemon, he'd like to have a Dragonite too someday. They looked strong. Within moments, the arena was already back in view, and he felt his heartbeat slow down. He wouldn't miss his chance to battle Richie. Thank you. He finally mumbled, even with the wind in his face. Tori turned and flashed him a smile and a nod. No problem. She shouted back, and then they were there, over the arena walls, and circling quickly before landing. The crowd around him shouted in surprise as he stepped off. A moment was all it took to catch his balance as he hit the ground, and then look up. Richie looked relieved that he hadn't missed the battle. Miss Ferris. This is irregular. You need to leave the arena. The announcer yelled out over the loudspeaker. I got it. I'm gone. Bye. She cheered, and then in a single motion, her Dragonite was far into the sky. So fast. Much faster than even Charizard when he wanted to move. That was going to be a tough Pokemon to battle. Then it was time. He turned to Richie, and the battle settled in. Pidgeotto wasn't too tired, but he probably wasn't going to bring him out this time. But for now? Better trust Squirtle. By the time I made it back to the arena next to Ivy, it was already over. Charizard had once more caused Ash to lose the match. A real shame. I had sort of hoped that maybe things would change with a bit of interference. But Ash had his destiny after all. I settled in next to Ivy, who looked upset, and she shot me a look before looking back at the arena where Richie and Ash were talking before finally splitting off from each other. He lost. She whispered, and I nodded. The announcer had called it out loud enough. I had heard as I was still entering. I know. Sorry, Ivy. Next year, Ash will have more experience, and be more ready. What if he stops? She mumbled, and I laughed. That kid? No way. He's going all the way. I told her, and it was at that point that Morty finally seemed to find his words. Whoa. Hello, I'm Morty. He moved forward a bit as Mimikyu peeked from my shoulder. Unfortunately, I didn't have a big hat for him to hide under right now. Mimikyu peeled himself away from his very strong hug with the side of my head, to look at Morty, who was leaning in. Kuku? Mimikyu questioned, and I instantly saw Morty, Jasmine, and anyone sitting near enough to us to hear it shift back. Heh. In this instance, it was kind of funny, because before Mimikyu could slump at everyone reacting so badly, Morty leaned in. Whoa, that's definitely a ghost, all right. Hi. He offered a hand only after glancing at me, and I nodded. Mimikyu looked from him to me, and I once more nodded because that was just my job in this meeting, and Mimikyu released a little of his death grip on me as his shadow hand uncoiled and reached out to shake. So. It's a ghost type? Jasmine asked, from over Morty's shoulder. What's up with the cute Pikachu thing? she asked, waving at him. His costume. Mimikyu have to hide their actual appearance, as it causes severe reactions in people. One researcher had like a heart attack. Jasmine didn't quite flinch back, she was a good enough trainer not to do that, but I did see her recoil a bit. But Mimikyu are the sweetest Pokemon ever, I said and rubbed my cheek against Mimikyu, which he instantly responded back wiggling happily, hee hee. You have a strong bond with him, Morty decided to say, smiling seemingly quite pleased, and then because he was a ghost nerd he continued asking questions, which Mimikyu and I tried to answer. Even Ivy was looking like she was going to start throwing elbows when the next match finally started, and disrupted Morty's stream of questions. My first match in the main arena. I stepped out into the bright lights. Night had fallen, but the stadium lights kept it so bright it didn't matter. Wasn't that first battle, between the Nidoran and the Gengar, a night battle too? The first battle many trainers from another world had ever seen, and I was getting to mimic it in a small way. This was it. My first real match of the conference. No more prelims. This was it. And I intended on going into it with a bang. The girl I was facing was strong. She was actually someone I recognized. Asunta. The girl that defeated Richie after he fought Ash. Did that mean, if I beat her here, that I would face Richie in the next round? Or had the entire order been disrupted? I just didn't know. I found my place, and I could see the girl's focused stare locked onto me. She was scared, but trying not to show it. I ignored the announcer as he spoke. His voice simply went in one ear and out the other. It didn't matter. I reached for my hip. I already knew who was coming out for this battle. My hand reached for my hip and the older girl's hand did the same. We weren't listening to the announcer. Our eyes had met, and this was a battle between trainers. The referee nodded and threw his hand down, as the crowd roared. I slung my pokeball, and watched as the crowd reacted in surprise, shock, happy surprise, and then confusion. It all happened in an instant as my friend looked around at all the people, her eyes practically sparkling. I could see how this impacted her. She was here. At this highest place, she waved her little arms in greeting first to her right, and then to her left, as she just loved how loud the crowd was at her appearance. And Victoria Ferrous releases her Blissey for the first time during this tournament. A strange choice from the well-known healer Pokemon. The announcer called and I saw Blissey look towards the announcer booth and huff a bit. With her flippers on her hips. Uh-oh. Someone had just questioned Blissey's ability to battle. I felt my smirk stretching, because everyone here was going to be in for a real surprise soon. Then in a massive crash Asunta released her first Pokemon. Rhyyyy. The Rhydon roared to the sky as it slammed its rocky fists into its own chest. I didn't listen to the announcer hyping up Rhydon. It didn't matter, Blissey looked at me, and I nodded. Our understanding was perfect. One doesn't simply fight a goddess after all. Begin. The match started, and instantly Rhydon charged forward. It was using a fighting-type move. I could see it prepare for a massive swing, but Blissey was already moving, a simple bounce of her legs and she went flying high into the sky. Her fins slapped together and I could practically hear her say "neen." As she blurred for a second. Substitute achieved. Don't let her touch the ground, Rhydon. Rhyyyy. The rock-type roared as it stomped towards where Blissey was coming in to land, but unfortunately that was what we wanted. Blissey shifted, shooting down, as her ability to actually sort of fly kicked in, something her evolution had gained, and it was awesome. She rocketed towards Rhydon, who reacted quickly. He was well trained, and his fist gathered energy to punch her. But as his fist arced up, it smashed into Blissey, and then in a poof, there was just smoke and a poke doll taking the hit. And Blissey appeared on the ground, crouching down under the poor rock-type's outstretched fist. And she grabbed on. Seismic toss. I called out as suddenly the Rhydon's feet left the ground. As it then shot into the sky. As it squealed in shock at its massive bulk being lifted so casually around, and then at the apex of her jump she started spinning. Chansey had a unique way of using seismic toss. As she flew up, she would grab on and use her feet to sort of spin herself, causing her enemy to spin around her as they fell to the ground and then they would hit first. Blissey didn't even need to do that. She could fly. The poor ride-on soon became a blur as it screeched as it began spinning faster and faster, and Blissey wasn't letting go. And then suddenly it ended. Blissey, having burned off all the momentum, floated a bit higher before she started coming down, but everyone was more focused on the massive explosion as Rhydon had been thrown towards the ground so fast it had just been a blur of motion. Blissey landed, and without waiting, I noticed her heal herself. Her egg glowing yellow and then flowing into Blissey, restoring the energy she had lost from using substitute. Finally the dust cleared, and I wasn't surprised. Rhydon was completely out. The poor guy's eyes were swirling as he lay in a massive crater. Asinta was just staring in shock at what had happened. A single attack and her Rhydon had gone down. Sure, it was a fighting type attack, so her rock type was weak against it, but still. No one was ready for the goddess. I nodded at my own thoughts. Everyone thought Dragonite or Arcanine were strong, but Blissey was probably the strongest of them all. She just didn't show it much, but here, today, in front of this entire crowd, in the largest stadium in Kanto. Blissey was going to alter everyone's perspective on just what Chansey and Blissey could do. Asinta hesitated as she stared at Blissey, seemingly trying to come up with some sort of counter. Rhydon probably had been her best counter. Then she did something that I couldn't help but feel bad for. Then I'm off. You're up. That was not a good choice. Blissey had trained under Koga. We were both well acquainted with that Pokemon. Minimize. Asinta yelled out, and I couldn't help but nod at the smart play. Someone had fought Koga, and decided to learn from him. But so did I. Swift. I called out in turn, and Blissey reacted. I had been stymied by evasion Pokemon before. Of course I had made sure my Pokemon knew some accuracy boost moves, or with Blissey Swift, which always hit. The stars shot out and Venomoth jerked left and right, and then to my amusement she vanished into a poke doll. Yep. Definitely someone that had learned under Koga. I flashed a ninja hand sign, but she didn't respond. Either not interested, or just someone that had learned from Koga through battle. Very well. The battle continued. Blissey countered Venomoth at every turn. It was too bad. There was just no way to do enough damage to Blissey to knock her out. The battle went relatively quickly, nothing Asinta did worked. Not her Ivysaur trying to use sleep to build up damage, not when her Tentacruel used toxic. Blissey simply healed through it and kept dishing out damage. Not overwhelmingly so, most of the time. Just slow constant attacks that chunked her enemies with every strike. Yet Blissey never once used her strongest move. The move that I knew would have won the match nearly instantly. Sometimes Asinta's Pokemon would fly into the sky to try and avoid Blissey, and in those quiet moments Blissey would turn to me, and our eyes would meet, both of us holding back inner laughter. Blissey was here to show up, but not show everything. Not yet. Some things you needed to keep until the end. I glanced up towards the VIP box. Towards where against the glass I could just make out a clash of red hair. Look, Lance. Look at what I can do. Look and think you have it all figured out. Make your plans, but be ready for me to crush them all. For the goddess might be here in the mud, but she hadn't truly descended. I turned back to the battle. Blissey facing off against Asinta's last Pokemon, her Fearow. The match was over when Blissey simply followed the Fearow around, her Swift, blasting into the bird Pokemon that had tried another evasion trick. Heh. Not enough. And then it went down, and Blissey landed with a soft puff on the ground looking around as the crowd roared at her overwhelming victory. The fact she was completely unhurt only made it better in my eyes. Practically sparkling Blissey waved this way and that towards the crowd, happily basking in their cheers. Chapter 84. The winner. I cried out, holding a flipper up to the sky, and the Pokemon Center went wild with cheers. The Nurse Joys attacked me as soon as I stepped into the Pokemon Center to get Blissey checked out, and so now we were holding a party. Poppers exploded confetti, and Blissey looked like she was going to start crying as the Nurse Joys Chansey all cheered around Blissey, almost singing and dancing, throwing confetti into the air around her. It was a celebration that was hitting Blissey pretty strongly. It was also super adorable. You deserve it all. I told her, and she looked at me, and then I was grabbed up and pulled into a ridiculously squishy yet strong hug as Blissey smothered me. I just giggled all the way through it as I hugged back. Victory for Blissey meant a lot to her. The entire crowd had been screaming their heads off after she wiped Asunta's team. It was pretty rare for a full wipe like that, and super rare in the conference, despite the fact I'd been doing it the whole time before. But for a Blissey or Chansey? I still remember Nurse Joy telling me that Chansey weren't Pokemon that were good at battling. Miss Ferris. A voice called out and I was finally pulled free from the death grip and I looked around to see someone I didn't really recognize. Yes, hello? The man smiled brightly and ran a hand through his brown hair as he stepped forward. Only the fact he was wearing a lab coat told me he was a researcher of some sort. I was hoping to run into you, after your amazing matches so far. I'm Professor Seras. He offered, sticking out a hand, and it took me a second to realize while he was younger than he was in the anime, that the man looked similar enough I could recognize him. He even had similar glasses. Call me Vicky. I offered back with a handshake which he took and quickly ran up and down, and my positive response earned me a pleased smile. I hate to bother you so soon after a match, especially with a well-deserved celebration, but I've been wanting to speak with you at some point. After the conference, I'd be delighted if you came down to the Vermilion Lab. You have many Pokemon we know so little about. I'd like to gather some data if you have time. Oh. I said because there was only one thing Ceres was basically asking me culturally. He wanted me to be one of his lab trainers. That was a big deal. I mean, there wasn't an electronic Pokédex to give me, but trainers helping professors fill Pokédex was. Old culture. I'll try to visit. I said, not quite agreeing, but not disagreeing either. Excellent. Here's my card, feel free to just give me a call when you are free. He offered a card in both hands that I quickly took, making sure to mimic the movement. Huh. Blissey. Blissey called out from behind me and I looked over and couldn't help but instantly start cackling as two Nurse Joys were sitting on Blissey's arms, while two Chansey hung from the ends as well. Absolutely power lifting the entire Pokemon Center staff. I snickered as cameras flashed, one held by a Chansey obviously taking pictures for the center, but she wasn't alone. I hurried over laughing as the four were put down, and cheered for Blissey's strength. She was absolutely showing off, to the delight of the entire center. I asked, blinking as I stirred from a night's sleep. The moon coming in the little lodge's window told me it was still late. Kiba was snoring above me, and Ivy's gentle little whistling breathing was across the way. But that wasn't what had woken me. No, it wasn't even Mimikyu, who I had kept with me after the battle, who was gently snoozing beside me. Blissey whispered apologetically as she turned away from the window to walk over to me, and to my surprise she settled onto my bed as I blinked sleepily at her, before she reached out and stroked my head. Ah, what sweet bliss. I felt myself relaxing as she petted my head. We stayed like that for a while, but you're amazing. I whispered to her, and she smiled down at me. Blissey. She whispered back and then poked my nose. Nah, I wouldn't be half as amazing without your support. I told her and she just shook her head and continued petting me as I felt my warm bed slowly drag me back down. I'm glad we're friends. I whispered out a sigh as I felt my eyes shut too heavy to keep open. Blissey definitely used gravity on my eyelids. But soon I was back asleep. In the morning I blinked away and saw Blissey was in her preferred position in the comfy chair in the room, a little blanket over her as she napped. It was a little surprising, she was usually the first one awake, but I guess she had an exciting day. I sat up and stretched. Cuckoo? Mimikyu breathed out, still half asleep, so I just reached out and pet him. It's okay, you can sleep in for a while. I whispered, but he stirred regardless and slipped onto my lap before seemingly curling up. Hee. Sleepy boy. Sleepy cutie boy. I hummed in delight as I held him for a while as he napped and snored in my lap. A loud jaw-breaking yawn above me told me Kiba was up as he grumbled and crawled out of his bed. I jerked to the side, well used to this, as he once again forgot he wasn't at home, and so when he slipped off and his foot didn't find the floor he yelped as he fell right off the bunk bed. Which of course woke up Ivy. Which was a mistake. Kiba. Ivy grumbled, throwing her blanket over her head. Ooh. He whined, which had Ivy's bed shifting as she grumbled at the noise keeping her up, and I just watched on as Kiba slowly got up, still complaining. Aw man, stupid bunk beds. Shut up. Ivy grumbled from within her blanket cocoon, which didn't work, and Kiba wasn't listening anyways. Alright. Last day of the conference. He held fists raised to the ceiling, and that was the final straw. Rag. Ivy roared herself as she got up and threw herself at Kiba. I of course just started laughing as Kiba was tackled, his girlish scream transitioning to howls of pain as Ivy made her displeasure known. Well, time to get up. Even Mimikyu was no longer napping, and Blissey's eyes opened despite the sudden disruption. She smiled beaming and rose up, pulling Kiba and Ivy apart with her usual casualness, ready to start her day. And so was I. It was time. Today was the end of the conference. This was now the 6th round, and that meant we were now down to just 8 Pokemon trainers. Top 8, semifinals, and finals would all be completed today. That means I had 3 matches ahead of me. I smirked at the casual confidence I'd make it that far. Today was the day. Slipping out of bed, I managed to start getting dressed, working around Ivy and Kiba's fight as I looked up to the other top bunk. Bugsy had roused and was staring confusingly at the brawl happening in the middle of the room. Yep. Today was a good day. I wasn't surprised that by the time we had all roused up and left the lodge building, someone was already waiting for us. I grinned as I opened my arms and was picked up into a big hug. Papa. There's my trouble. He whispered into the side of my head as he held me tight. Finally, he set me back down and was doing the proud papa smile. You ready? I am. Good. Another voice cut in as I looked over at Elizabeth of all people. You had better win. I won't accept anything but being defeated by the one who wins it all. I will. I offered to her. It was weird to see her and Papa together. Come on, all 4 of you, we have a breakfast spread at the inn for all of us. Papa offered, and Kiba smiled happily at the idea of food, as Ivy bowed lightly in thanks. The food was free for competitors anyway though, guys. I shrugged and followed happily, even if Elizabeth kept slightly out of the group as we all headed towards the inn. It was weird that she had come at all, walking all the way from the inn with my dad. My interest was obvious as I kept glancing at her, and finally she caught my eyes with her own, glared me down and then rolled her eyes. I decided to walk with Uncle Victor to get to know him a little better. We've never had a conversation, so I decided to actually talk to him. She explained, and that struck me quite hard. My cousin actually wanted to talk to Papa. Was our family actually mending all the trouble? It hit me then. Papa and Uncle Leo had been close during the conference. Graham and everyone were in just a few rooms, and there hadn't been some monumental fight or anything. I felt my smile spreading at the thought. What do you know, my family was actually acting like a family. Zealous versus Richie was the first fight of the day, and I felt bad. Richie didn't stand a chance. It wasn't even a long match. Once more, Zealous relied on Haxorus to start. The lack of practice Kanto trainers had against both dragon types, and that Pokemon in particular, just brutalized Richie's unevolved team. The boy left the arena quickly, and I noticed Ash and company running off to go with him. I nodded at that. Good, he might need a pep talk after what Zealous had done. Considering the speed of the battles, there was no need to go to the Pokemon Center. Already, a Chansey was meeting up with Zealous to give direct attention to her Pokemon to make sure they'd be ready for their next match. Cuckoo? Mimikyu pulled me away from the match that was going to start. A couple people I didn't know to point at something he'd seen. Oh. Wanna try it? I asked, and he hesitated for a bit before nodding. I waved over for the sellers, and while I paid for the drink, I did make sure to check that I wasn't buying from Team Rocket. I don't remember if they started selling food and drinks and stuff this early in the anime, but it was a definite thing to keep an eye out for. Pretty sure the old guy wasn't James though. Then I handed the drink with a big Pikachu straw and lid on the top over to Mimikyu, who looked it over and then took a drink. Cuckoo. He cheered, enjoying the taste and his little Pikachu top on the drink. Well, it was soda. He'd be okay as long as he didn't drink too much. I'm just happy he liked it even if it was a Pikachu. 2 more matches came and went. The first against who I suspected would have won this tournament if Zealous or I weren't here. Power and skill combined with experience. Terrence. He was 17 and absolutely here for the conference win. He overcame his opponent with a team that worked together. Synergies in between his Pokemon, combo moves, even some weather effects, to power up his team. It came together as a truly powerful trainer, someone that had a bright future no matter what he did from here. The second set of trainers I had never really seen before. They fought well, but it was a close match, coming down to their partner Pokemon. Wartortle's agility overcoming a Charizard's power. Then it was my turn. I passed Mimikyu back through the teleporter just before and walked out with my conference team ready to go. The boy was younger than Terrence, 14 or so, and he had fought well. Not nearly as polished as the other boy, not yet as experienced, but he fought well and his Pokemon listened eager to battle. I stepped out onto the conference grounds to a roar of the crowd, to the announcer once more calling out my name, pumping me up to the crowd. I'd done a bit of a flare in all my matches so far, I suppose. Winning every match without switching, without losing a Pokemon. I would have liked to continue with that trend, but it wasn't fair to not use Lucario after she'd agreed to battle with me. Trainers, release your Pokemon. The announcer roared. Something I'd noticed was how much more into it he was since the main conference started. I guess this was the last day after all. Go. I called out at the same time as my opponent and the crowd cheered not just for his Nidoking taking the field and roaring. As always, the people of Kanto loved their Nido line. But they also roared for seeing a new rare Pokemon that so few would have heard of before. Lou. She challenged, already taking a fighting stance, and the Nidoking looked her over warily as his experience wouldn't help him here. And Victoria releases her Lucario. A rare fighting steel-type Pokemon. The announcer called out, which was a bit odd. It wasn't that unusual to call out the Pokemon's type, but still not common either. Heh. Maybe he'd been told to try and balance the battlefield if I pulled out another rare Pokemon? It didn't matter. Lucario. Let's give it our all. I roared out, fist punched out to mimic her stance. It wasn't perfect, our synergy still wasn't quite there, but it had grown pretty well considering how little time we've really had together. Begin. The announcer roared. We'll take care of your Pokemon. Nurse Joy was there the moment I stepped off the conference, and I only gave her my Pokeballs because she actually had a Chansey with her. Stupid Team Rocket, making me nervous about Nurse Joy. I followed her right into an internal Pokemon Center, where she took the balls behind the counter to begin checking over. But my eyes were on Zealous. Zealous. I cheered, hurrying over, and I could see her shoulders slump as she looked up from the Pokeball in her hand to glare at me. What do you want? To say hi. I cheered and she rolled her eyes but scooted over a little on the large bench seating to let me sit beside her. How's your team? Haxorus not too tired? He's fine. Your Lucario? She's okay, I pulled her before she would get too beat up. I confirmed. The first time any of my Pokemon needed to be switched out. It had caused the crowd to go wild, thinking they were going to get a massive show. Then I released Arcanine, 'cause she'd been whining at me for not getting enough battles. Are you ready for your next match? Of course. She said, looking at me with a firm glare. I'll see you in the finals. I look forward to it. You've done so well. Humph, your Pokemon have been fighting better. She said, flipping her hair, trying to act casual. It's all thanks to you. I'm so happy we trained together so much before the conference. It was useful. She agreed, actually sounding nice. But it won't be enough to defeat me. Hee hee. I won't lose to you either, Zealous. I said cheerfully, knowing it would make her respond. Tisk, annoying as always, farm girl. Are you excited? For the finals, I mean, you know? This is nothing. The Virtus conference is massive compared to this one. Oh really? Do they have lots of stadiums? I asked, wondering how Unova did their conference. Just the 4 smaller arenas and the large one. She confirmed, just like here in Kanto then. Oh. Then more competitors? I asked, and I could see Zealous growing red up her cheeks, to her ears. There are way more people showing up. Unova is bigger. Better. She yelled at me before standing and stomping off. Ah. Well. I'd see her later then. Good luck. I called out after her, and she stalled before turning to look at me. Her blonde hair, straight and well-groomed compared to my Messier style, was pushed aside with a flick of her head, and she nodded. I don't need luck. Ooh. How cool. The battle was fantastic. I watched as Zealous gave it her all, a fierce battle using all of her skill. Yet Haxorus getting knocked out by a powerful ice move from a Lapras of all things. Set a terrible path in motion. Rain dance Lapras into thunder from a Raichu using light screen before getting knocked out, to give a Charizard enough time to start powering up. I stared, realizing slowly what was happening from the crowd. It was exciting, everyone was shouting. But Zealous was losing. Terrence was actually defeating her. Both of them were struggling against each other. This was a serious battle, but Terrence had really good combos with his Pokemon. Synergy. His Pokemon set up moves for the next one. Counters and prep moves. He was doing an amazing job at planning her next move. In the end, Scyther wasn't able to defeat a Golem that had used a few defense buff moves. I watched Scyther fall, that Pokemon that just refused to give up, and Zealous obviously wasn't ready to lose either, but then it happened. The winner of the semifinals. Terrence. Let's give it up to the trainer going all the way to the finals. The crowd went wild around me, but I was watching Zealous as her knees gave out and she slumped. Her Pokeball just retracted Scyther almost instinctively, but then, she sat there for a while. Even as the crowd all around her cheered for her opponent. I rushed towards the trainer area to catch her. To say something, anything. Maybe another locker room talk? It had helped so far. But by the time I reached it, Zealous was already gone. Winner. Victoria Ferrous. The announcer roared out. I had gone into this match differently than any of my others. My Pokemon hadn't been allowed to just rampage through my semi-finalist opponent's team. I'd switched out Pokemon each time, forcing him to face a fresh Pokemon each time I defeated one of his own. I felt bad, but I wasn't feeling good. The bitterness of Zealous losing to someone else was. I didn't like it. She was supposed to face me in the finals. It was supposed to be a good final battle for her time in Kanto. I knew she wanted to leave, and I didn't know when, so it was supposed to be a cherished memory that the two of us could share. She was my friend. Instead, she'd been beaten by some jerk face. I might have taken it out on my opponent, overwhelming his team by going all out. It also gave my team a chance to stretch their legs before the finals. Terrence had defeated Zealous. Zealous was strong and sneaky. I thought she'd win. I stepped off the field, the cheering crowd muffled by the concrete, as my Pokemon were handed over to a Chansey to once again look them over before the finals. There would be a 2-hour intermission. Enough time for the Pokemon of both teams to get a full healing and time to restore their stamina. I stalked into the locker room, which was quiet, and just plopped on the bench inside. So this was it, the end of the conference. Just one more battle, and I'd have the right to challenge the Elite Four. All within my first year. It was. I was going to be dealing with the repercussions of this for a long time, I knew. I'd already heard the words more than once. Prodigy. Genius. It didn't matter. I had no interest in doing this for a living. Ash might have a dream of being the best, but I honestly wasn't too interested. Well, maybe I'd get a team strong enough to beat up Leon if I ever went to Galar. I really didn't like that walking billboard. In the end, my eyes closed and I felt myself relaxing. No point in getting worked up about the finals. Just a little nap before the match started sounded pretty nizzzzzzz. Chapter 85. Vicky. Wassa? I blinked awake at the yell. Looking up, Ivy was hurrying over and then grabbing me. Hey. I yelped at the rough treatment. You're late. Stupid. She yelled at me and started trying to drag me along, but I fought her for a second. Mouth wipe, yep, that was drool. Alright, I was cleaned up. Okay, I'm going, relax. You're late. They've called for you. It's fine. Not like they're going to have the finals without me. I joked, which didn't go well as Ivy turned to glare at me. Take this seriously. This is. Vicky, this isn't something to joke about. You're in the finals. In your first conference. Yeah, I know. I did the battles myself. I told her a little flatly, but Ivy spun on me again and brought her face so close she was practically nose to nose. I know you'll win, Vicky, but this isn't about just winning. You have to do more than just that. You're in the finals, you could face the Elite Four. Vicky. You represent all of us. So don't mess it up. Ivy said and then tapped a fist into my shoulder. Yeah, alright. I said, taking a breath and letting it out. I stretched and worked my neck for a minute. A frantic Nurse Joy was there before breathing out in relief as she saw me as she entered the locker room. There you are. She yelped and offered me my pokeballs. Thank you. I told her as I hooked them on, patting them gently. I represent all of Kanto, right? Then I guess I should show everyone what a Kanto trainer can do. I told Ivy with a big smile. That's right. Ivy said, smirking, and then she went behind me and started pushing. Hey. Now hurry up. Being late is not cool. The cool kid always shows up late for the tournament. I offered, and Ivy scoffed. Only idiots do that. Oh, so Ash is an idiot? I'll have to tell. Ow. Move it. Ivy hissed, and I hurried away at her pinching hands. Geez, was she part crabby? Rubbing at my ear, I hurried down the hall until suddenly, as I broke through onto the field, the noise peaked and slammed into me, actually stopping me cold. Lights pointed at me, and the crowd roared. So many people, they were uncountable to me. Just a pure mass, all screaming and shouting. Noisemakers went off, and I just looked up. So this was what the final match of the conference was like? I raised my hands and waved to the people shouting and cheering as I approached the trainer's stand. And here she is. A little late, but Victoria Ferrous takes the field. The announcer called out. I walked up the steps, finally arriving at my position. Across from me was Terrence. The boy looked annoyed at my lateness, but his face calmed down and he was soon focused and glaring. Before this match begins, President Goodshow will offer some words. The announcer called out, and I just breathed as the spotlights shifted to show an old man with a big beard adjusting a microphone. Once more, we see the incredible talent of the youth. We've watched them reach the end of their first-year journey, or their second, or third, or more. Once more, the Kanto Pokemon League has guided a new generation towards this goal, not just training Pokemon, but discovering themselves along their journey. I am proud of every trainer that took part this year, on a journey, or as a gym trainer, or leader. If this generation of trainers prove anything, it's that Kanto's future is in good hands. Now. I won't hold you. The light cut off, once more leaving it as just me and Terrence. A night battle under stadium lights. The noise of the crowd was loud, but it all fell away as I waited, my hand already wrapped around a pokeball. I knew who to start with. Let the final battle of the Indigo League Conference, Victoria Ferrous vs. Terrence Itsuki. Begin. My hand moved, and a pokeball was thrown. Terrence did the same, and both pokeballs fell into the bright light of the arena, before exploding open. Arcanine held as she appeared. I could tell how excited she was with how many embers were floating off her fur. But it looks like someone had tried to be sneaky. GOL. Golem go. Arc. Arcanine barked back as Golem slammed his fists into his chest. It was a good choice. Heavy defense, and a type advantage. Golem against Arcanine was a great choice by Terrence. Except Golem was slow. Arcanine. Go. Golem. Terrence yelled, and then it was on. Arcanine blurred across the battlefield. Her zigzagging rush meant Golem couldn't tell exactly when she would appear, and then there was a massive crash metal on rock. The attack was brutal, and Golem was pushed back, skidding across the grassy field, but to my surprise, Terrence had obviously planned for that. Golem had grabbed onto Arcanine, expecting the attack, no doubt. The fact she couldn't bounce back like she normally did gave Golem all the time he needed for his own attack to burst out from the ground. Slabs of rock burst from the grass and slammed into Arcanine, earning a roar from my big dog. Rock tomb. Trying to slow Arcanine down? Not sure if that's going to be enough. Arcanine suddenly burst out of the rocks, shooting into the sky as she jumped back and landed heavily. Rocks were still sticking to her, weighing her down, and more importantly making her gait a little off. That's not enough. Arcanine, rush it down. I called out. Golem wouldn't last through another hit regardless. Do it. Terrence called out, and I blinked and had to cover my eyes as suddenly dust and grime washed over me. Explosion. He'd waited for Arcanine to charge and so she'd get hit. That was certainly a choice. The smoke cleared slowly. Golem is no longer able to battle. The referee called out, and Terrence returned his rock type. I watched as Arcanine became visible. She was breathing heavily and looked battered. That was not a weak move. If this was a normal situation, I'd return her, but Arcanine didn't want that. Even if I did. She was hurt, and I hated seeing my girl hurt. I'd have to give her all the pets after this. There was a pause, and Terrence was looking from me to my Pokemon. The obvious concern on his face was kind, but I just shrugged at him. The action made his face harden, and then he grabbed his Pokeball. Go. The ball bounced and then popped open. Machamp. The four-armed fighting type roared out, arms raised to the crowds. Weird choice, but I suppose there wasn't any point in letting this continue. Arcanine. Go. I roared out, and my girl held as she instantly burst forward in a blitz. I kept watching all the way, expecting some trick to land before she struck, but I blinked when Machamp guarded up but took the blow. Just like Golem. The fighting type rocked back, obviously unprepared for the full-out power of an extreme-speed Arcanine, but then it was over. Revenge. Terrence had yelled just as the strike hit. And even as Machamp was pushed backwards by a massive strike, one of his lower arms arched upwards. This time Arcanine yelped as the blow caught her below her diaphragm and launched her upwards. Revenge was a powerful move that only got stronger if the user had just been hit. Or something like that. I winced as Arcanine hit the dirt and then it went quiet. Return. I called out before the announcer could even call out that she couldn't battle any longer. Yeah, she was done. Take a rest. I whispered to her ball before attaching it back to my belt. A sacrifice play into a Pokemon that was meant to take the first hit. It was a workable strategy. Terrence had just been the first trainer to actually knock out any of my Pokemon. That was impressive, but the problem with this sort of strategy is it wasn't sustainable. What was Terrence planning? He can't win like this. Go. Milotic. I roared out, no longer willing to dwell on it. This battle wasn't over yet, but no matter what tricks he planned, it wouldn't matter. And Milotic takes the field. Look at his scales, truly they earned the title of most beautiful Pokemon. The announcer called out, as the ref dropped the flag. Prepare. I called out and Milotic disappeared into the ground in a burst of water. Bulk Machamp. Terrence called out only after seeing Milotic disappear. So he was going to try for a sweep now? He tended towards synergizing moves. Using one Pokemon to roll into the next abilities. Was he planning on some sort of Baton Pass? Did Machamp learn Baton Pass? I shrugged it off, I'd find out soon enough. Milotic would be preparing, digging down and getting his moves started for his own sweep, and I'd bet on Milotic every day. The arena went quiet outside the faint rumble of people talking, all of them wondering when Milotic would appear, or what would happen next. Then Terrence broke the stalemate. Earthquake. He roared out, and I just had to nod. Good choice, Milotic was underground, which would make the earthquake really hurt. It was unfortunately something that while we'd planned for, didn't have a perfect response. The water would help cushion him a bit, and he knew what to do if he could get to it fast enough. Hopefully he could use Protect. Either way, like I said, we'd come up with a plan for if someone tried to mess with Milotic's dig again. Stupid Koga and his stupid Psychic Dig attack. The arena jerked and rumbled as the ground shifted, but other than water spurting out in geysers, nothing else happened, and Terrence looked around as if expecting something to happen. But it didn't. Milotic would already be recovering if he took damage, and my boy could outlast the damage. Either Machamp would tire itself out with Earthquake, or Milotic would finish preparing and make his move. And Victoria's Milotic is nowhere to be seen. Has it been knocked out by that groundbreaking earthquake? The announcer called out and I rolled my eyes at the pun, but it became more serious a moment later when the referee looked at me and threw up a flag. Shit. Stupid tournament rules, they were going to call him K.O'd unless he popped up soon. I grabbed the guardrail on the stand I was on and took a deep breath. Milotic full power. I roared as loud and as long as I could. Ugh. Throat is sore. But then a moment later, the ground rumbled under Mach-Amp, and Terrence reacted. Dodge it. He yelled out, his Mach-Amp leaping forward. Doing a pretty cool sort of front flip using his forearms to keep him rolling as the ground exploded as Milotic burst out of the ground. His entire body buzzed with power, and glowed white, but his tail carried with him a glob of water that as he reached his apex formed into an extension of his pretty tail, which then came rushing down towards Mach-Amp. There was the sound of flesh on flesh as Aqua Tail slammed down into the Machamp's guard. For arms all working together to try and stop the attack. It was only partially effective. Mach-Amp made a grunt as the attack landed and the arena below his feet, already damaged by earthquake, cracked and then crumbled. His footing lost, I realized it was over, and a moment later Milotic spun into another attack that Mach-Amp was simply not capable of blocking. The side blow, not even a full move, but just physical power, blew Mach-Amp away as he went tumbling across the arena. A powerful surprise attack. The announcer called out, but I tuned out the chattering. Mach-Amp rose up looking shocked at the strength of the blow, but then Terrence was there. Get close. Machamp. The fighting type roared, energy flowing over his body as he charged. It only took a moment, Mach-Amp burst forward, close combat a move that forgot about defense to go full offense, and Milotic seeing the attack coming, and his tail glowing as he prepared. Then the two Pokemon collide. Machamp's punches came out in a blur of attacks, while Milotic used his tail like a shield, sweeping in fast strikes blocking the attacks. The training Zealous had given him on parrying was the only thing holding off the assault, but hold it off he did. The two Pokemon went at it, and the crowd went wild at the display of attacks. Who would have thought that a Milotic could go toe-to-toe with a fighting type? Look at them go. Terrence though must have realized that it was over. He looked from me to his Pokemon and then yelled out. Mach-Amp. Do it. Milotic. Take him out. I called back as well, and the two Pokemon both glowed. Close combat for all its power was a move that sacrificed defense. To keep it up, to keep using it over and over, meant that any attack would do immense damage. Considering how much Mach-Amp had glowed with power, he likely could be taken out with any of Milotic's attacks now. So it was time for a desperation move. Both Pokemon suddenly stopped defending and just went for the win. The strikes sounded out across the arena. Machamp's bulked up close combat, and Milotic's Aqua Tail both struck. Machamp's entire head flattened by Milotic's attack, and Milotic? Ouch. I winced in sympathetic pain as I noticed that the punch seemed to have dug deep into Milotic's muscle. The silence stretched on, as both Pokemon remained in place, an almost haunting tableaus of the final strike. Then Mach-Amp crumpled. Milotic groaned as the punch was pulled from him and he wavered. He looked at me. Good job. I mouthed to him as I raised my Pokeball and returned him. You did perfectly. I told him. He could have recovered and fought more, but that attack had been a lot. Better to just let him rest. And Victoria Ferrous returns her Milotic first. Then a moment later Mach-Amp was returned and his icon on the board was crossed out. He'd managed to stall out my sweep. But we were back at square one, and I wasn't out of sweepers. Go. I called out, throwing a Pokeball that could be my last. Dragonite cheered as she appeared and once more, the crowd went wild. Her wings beat letting her hover in the air and she looked around and waved almost shyly at everyone earning plenty of shouts and screams. Not everyone was happy, but since this was a Kanto Dragonite, and not a Blackthorn one. Even the older trainers looked pleased. But any cheers for Dragonite ended when the next Pokemon took the field and everyone went silent before going absolutely crazy. Look at that, folks. Trainer Terrence releases his Lapras. The Pokemon was just as beautiful as Milotic in its own way, as it looked around and trilled a song that was beautiful even with how simple it was. Ah. I wanted a Lapras. Look how cute it was. I shook it off, another time. Right now, it was time for a battle. Dragonite. I called out, already she was preparing to charge, but this wasn't just a tournament to blast through my opponent. I wasn't just having fun here, but showing that I was a real trainer, that knew what they were doing. No, against Lapras, there was only one good choice. I pulled my Pokeball and returned Dragonite. The entire arena went silent for a moment. Heh. No one had expected me to swap out? It was within the rules, but I'd never really did so far in the tournament. But this was the finals. Sorry Dragonite, you'll get your fight soon. Now go. I threw my next Pokeball, and then there she was. Lucario howled as she appeared on the battlefield. Of course I could see Terrence realize what I'd just done. Lapras was weak against fighting. A moment later, he withdrew his own Pokemon. A double switch out. Folks, both trainers are being careful now. The next Pokemon irritated me. Char. The Charizard roared as it appeared. Terrence had released his starter, and it was a perfect opponent against Lucario. She knew it too. I could see her glance at me for a moment before refocusing. Lucario. Bone Rush. I called out, and her body shifted from where she was about to prep an aura sphere to instead generating the energy bone. Charizard. Fire Blast. The battle began with a literal bang. Lucario dodging the massive fire attack with a few quick hops before charging forward, but Charizard with one beat of his. No, her wings burst into the sky straight upwards. Lucario looked at me for a second. Again our disconnect caused some issues. Work up. If she wants to fly away, then we'll use the time. I called out, and I saw Lucario begin preparing. Alright. Charizard. Flamethrower. Keep up the heat. I didn't say anything. Lucario knew what to do. She ducked and dodged as the Charizard dove, spitting flames before pulling up before preparing for another dive bomb. It was a smooth combination. The Charizard had been trained well to keep this up while avoiding attacks in turn. Then it was time. Lucario noticed it, and for once our understanding didn't need words. The next time Charizard came down in a dive, Lucario didn't dodge, but charged forward. Even as the flamethrower was released, as the wall of flames came at her, she pulled up the bone she'd made for Bone Rush and charged in. I winced as she didn't do what I'd hoped. I'd thought she'd spin the bone and use it as a shield to block the flames, but Lucario, despite all our training together, was still her own fighter. She simply took the flames, and as she burst through right into Charizard's face, it was obvious the flames had hurt. Then her bone club came down and the type advantage skewed in the other way. Bone Rush was a ground type, and the club smacked 3 times, before Charizard blew past Lucario. A moment later, both Pokemon fell to the dirt. Lucario struggled to her feet, turning, and the Charizard did the same. Ah. I see, I had to give it to him. Lucario, return. I called out, as she slumped holding onto her shoulder. A moment later, the Charizard spread her wings and roared at her victory. The iconic Kanto Pokemon had the crowd cheering at her victory. Even I felt a smile come to my lips at how cool it was to see a Charizard. I wanted a Charizard friend. Or at least a Charmander. I bet they were great cuddle buddies. Right focus. Still have to deal with this battle thing, and right now? Terrence was putting in a lot of effort here. He was skilled. He'd definitely be a challenge for Koga, but I don't think he could actually win against him. I rolled a Pokeball into my hand and underhanded it off the stand and into the field. It landed and only then exploded open with a massive roar that shook the arena and had the crowd go silent. And Victoria releases her flying Gyarados. The announcer practically yelled, and the crowd rumbled, both the noise of those excited and scared. Charizard. Thunder Punch. Blue Heart. Aqua Tail. I called out, and Charizard yelped as Gyarados shifted and his tail came down from above. Gyarados didn't have the skill training that Milotic had yet. So every attack he made he gave it his all. There was no subtlety, no thought to missing. He simply attacked with everything, and in this case, despite Charizard normally having a speed advantage, the poor fire type just couldn't dodge. It roared as the wave of water surrounding Blue Heart's tail smashed down. There was the sound of the floor below cracking, already weakened from all the damage of the fight so far, embedding Charizard into the dirt. A titanic strike. Is the Charizard out of the battle? Then Blue Heart gave a yelping noise as he jerked away, revealing the glowing electricity-charged fist of the Charizard as she pulled herself free from the earth. The Charizard was definitely not out. Even if she looked a little tattered, her tail flame bloomed as she roared, showing her fighting spirit wasn't done yet. Of course, despite just getting hit by an electric move, Blue Heart wasn't exactly concerned either. No, he was instead very angry. Blue Heart. Again. I called out, and Charizard cut off her roar to jerk away as another aqua tail slammed into where she had been. He roared at her, and she did what every Charizard did, she flew higher to get out of reach. Which was probably a mistake. Blue Heart glared up at her, at the fact she was in the sky to try and escape. The sky that belonged to him. He coiled, shifting, even as Terrence moved. "You sunny day." He called out urgently, and Charizard did, flaring her wings, and suddenly, despite the fact it was night time, the arena was lit up like bright daylight. I had never actually seen sunny day during the night before. It was really cool. Like a mirage covering what should be, with what now was. My heart. After her. I yelled, almost cackling, as with just a single dragon dance, he surged up and into the sky, charging straight towards the Charizard. The flying Pokémon made a noise like a yelp and jerked to the side, desperate to avoid the much larger Pokémon chasing after her. But to my amusement, that single dragon dance had been all Blue Heart needed, not just to reach the sky, but to keep up. Charizard let out a shocked noise as she looked back, only to find Blue Heart right on her tail, mouth open and reaching. Now. Charizard. Solar Beam. Blue Heart. Bear through it, and Aqua Tail. I called out. I didn't have a move strong enough to overcome a Solar Beam. Especially not during sunny day, when Charizard could just keep blasting. The ray of energy from the Solar Beam crashed into Gyarados, causing my Blue Heart to roar out in pain and anger, as his tail lashed out. It slammed into Charizard from below, and for a moment the Pokémon wasn't flying but just spinning around in circles through the air. Then slowly, as it reached the peak, she seemed to stir and shake a bit, her wings flared, but she couldn't quite seem to regain control, as she spun and glided to the ground before crashing heavily. Blue Heart hung in the air above her, his maw opened, and I knew that if I didn't do something, he'd keep throwing things at her. Hold. I called out, and Blue Heart shifted, stopping his attack to look at me. Which is when I gave him a big smile. You're doing great. I called out, just so he'd know how happy I was for him. His tail fin twisted and rocked a bit back and forth, showing how happy he was. And Charizard is no longer able to battle. The announcer called out, and that was that. 3 down. Terrence took a moment, seeming to be catching his breath, trying to find a way forward. Then finally he threw his next Pokeball. Richuwu. The Pokémon called out as it appeared, jumping up and down and sparking. And a Raichu takes the stage. Can Terrence pull out a win against this monstrous flying Pokémon? The announcer called out, enunciating the flying a bit more than he probably should. I didn't care though. Blue Heart. Lightning Rod. Raichu. Thunder. I smirked as Blue Heart's tail slammed into the ground. The massive tail shone like metal and dug deep, like he had just slammed a shovel into the earth. The sunny sky lit up even brighter as lightning shot down and slammed into Blue Heart's crown spikes. Then it ended, and everyone was waiting with bated breath. I just smirked, because slowly Blue Heart's head dropped down. That had probably hurt, but not enough to knock him out. Blue Heart. Aqua Tail. I called out. Raichu might be an electric type, but that only gave him an offense bonus, not a defense one against water attacks. Then there was a roar as he charged forward, using his tail, still anchored in the ground, to fling himself forward in a move so fast even Raichu barely started to try and dodge as a massive tail came down. The crash against the arena kicked up dust, and I wasn't sure if it had actually hit. Everyone went quiet, waiting with bated breath. The smell of ozone was my only warning. Lightning Rod. I called out, but it was too late, and thunder arced down from the sky to slam down onto Gyarados. He roared in pain and shook back and forth for a moment. Raichu! Terrence called out, as Gyarados' tail shifted, revealing the mouse that was bruised and beaten. It slowly climbed to its feet. Electroshock! Terrence called out to try and finish the fight. Aqua Tail! I called out just after, and while Raichu tried to regain itself, Blue Heart acted without thought. There was no hesitation, no consideration. He heard my call, and so his tail came down on top of Raichu, and once more, the entire arena cracked, rock splintered and shattered. I pulled up his Pokeball and called for his return. You fought so well, thank you, Blue Heart. I whispered to the ball, even as the dust cleared, showing the unconscious Raichu. Once again the icon on the screen showed an X, while Gyarados was simply returned. Not that I planned on using him again in this match, considering how bad those electric attacks would be against him. I threw out my next Pokeball. Unfortunately, it meant a mirror match again. Raichu was returned, and Lapras once more was released. Very well, if he thought ice would be enough, he was wrong. The match returns. Furious Dragonite versus Beautiful Lapras. Who will win? Ice or Dragon? The announcer called out, and I just threw out my hand. Dragonite. Thunder Punch. Ice Beam. But Lapras was just too slow, and before it could even begin charging, Dragonite slammed into her. The crack of thunder echoed out, and the poor thing squealed at the force of the blow, being knocked almost onto her side from the strike. But this wasn't a wild Pokemon. This Lapras was trained well. She shifted and opened her mouth. The ice beam struck and Dragonite flinched back as her shoulder was coated, but it wasn't enough of a hit to freeze her. She beat her wings and disappeared from Lapras's eyes, flying straight up to get some space. The battle was set. Already Dragonite was using the space, beginning a dragon dance that would end this battle, even as Lapras used recover to restore herself from that powerful strike. Lapras. Hail! Terrence called out, as Lapras sang to the sky, and the sky went dark. Sunny day gone, and the crackle of ice landing on the ground suddenly picked up. Dragonite. Prepare! I called out, and I could see her nod at my order even as the hail started battering her, but she never stopped her dragon dance. Okay, Lapras. Go for it! Terrence yelled. I watched as Lapras began shooting ice beam into the sky at Dragonite. It was easy for Dragonite to dodge, the beam shooting into the sky causing more and more ice to fall all over the battlefield as Dragonite continued to prepare for a sweep. Then Dragonite roared, practically blowing away the ice from around her as she was satisfied with her preparation. Lapras. Now. Perish Song. Terrence called out in desperation, and the ringing dirge echoed out even as Dragonite simply disappeared from the sky, and a blazing jagged cut appeared in the hailstorm, showing her path as she slammed into Lapras. Perish Song? Why this late? It was late for that. And Victoria is on a timer, as Perish Song will knock out her Pokemon soon. Lapras was returned, the poor thing knocked out, and Terrence released his final Pokemon. Probably one that was the most dangerous. Alakazam. Called out the Psychic-type Pokemon as he appeared on the battlefield. The match restarted quickly. Go! I yelled out, but even as Dragonite used Dragon Rush and buzzed across the battlefield, Alakazam disappeared in a static burst. Ah! Teleport! I looked around and couldn't see him. Dragonite and I both began searching. Up? No, the hail clouds weren't dense enough to block sight. Down? I looked into the cracked, ruined arena, and realized this was the plan. Sneaky, but I wasn't going to just let Dragonite get knocked out. Dragonite. Bring it all down. Draco Meteor. I roared out, and she instantly spread her arms, and energy burned inside her. Hailstorm. Terrence yelled in return. And I blinked at the shout before I saw it. All across the battlefield, every bit of hail, all the ice suddenly glowed, and then shot upwards, towards Dragonite. The flower of Draco Meteor exploded in the sky, the energy starting to fall downwards as it smashed into the hail that was shooting upwards. The ice chunks throwing into the sky slammed into the Draco Meteors. Just one or two wasn't enough, but 100? Each? The hail slowly disrupted the attacks. Suddenly, the sky of the arena was filled with explosions and sparkling lights as the Draco Meteors discharged early, exploding and shaking everything each time. It was our very own fireworks. I felt my smile stretch as the sky lit up with explosion after explosion. How beautiful. Then, thanks to all the flashing lights, and the ice lifting off, Dragonite must have spotted her target. There was the sound of a roar, dopplered with how fast she was moving, and a crash. I can't see anything, folks. Will we have a winner when the dust clears on this magnificent display? And then it did clear, and I couldn't help but break into a bit of giggles. Dragonite had found her target, but at some point, she must have been knocked out by Perish Song. Poor Alakazam was crushed underneath her, only his hands filled with spoons jutting out from her scales showed that he was there. Return. I called out. Dragonite was obviously out, but Terrence was on the edge of the stand looking down. Desperation and fear spread across his face. And then the referee dropped the flag. Alakazam is unable to battle. The winner of the Indigo League is Victoria Ferrous. The announcer practically shrieked, and the entire arena came alive cheering and shouting, and before I could think to do anything, as Terrence returned his Pokémon, there were muffled pops and above us lights exploded into the sky. Real fireworks this time. I looked up and watched as they exploded, even as people shrieked and cheered, and even as I'm sure I should do something, but it was done. I could finally. I took a deep breath and let it out even as my knees gave way and I fell. I stared into the sky. I liked Dragonite's fireworks more, I thought. These were nice, but Draco Meteor exploding had been spectacular. Truly and utterly spectacular. All of them had been. Even if I'm sure Arcanine would be utterly upset at her loss. But I was done. I'd spent more than a year working towards this. The journey, the one thing that I'd been looking forward to and dreading. It was over. The finale to the entire trip was fireworks shot up into the sky on one of the tallest mountains in Kanto, and I was happy, but more than that? I felt relieved. Sure, I still had the Elite Four and Lance, but there was expectations around the journey that I was finally free of. While Lance was personal. This was, I remember this feeling. Graduating high school, finishing schooling, the expectation had flowed off my shoulder and I'd been free then too. This wasn't the end, but the start, I realized. I closed my eyes, letting the lights of the fireworks explode over my eyelids. This was the start of my life. Vicky. I opened my eyes and smiled as I realized my friends and family were storming the stand. Ivy was already climbing onto the stand, as I turned, and then I was tackled. You did it. I did it. I cheered back, and then I was swarmed as Papa was there, first helping Mama over the ledge before he reached down and just picked me up bodily from the ground, disrupting Ivy for a moment as he spun me around, and then Mama was there hugging me from the other side. Ivy was cheering, shouting, and yet still barely heard over the noise of the crowd. So that was a Pokemon journey. Pretty fun, but now I had a Pokemon life to explore. I felt my smile stretch wide as I raised my hands into the sky from Papa's arms and roared in victory. While the final presentation was being completed, I found myself standing beside Terrence in the trainer waiting area. There was an awkward silence for a while as we watched the proceedings on the TV in the corner, waiting for us to be called. But the awkward silence stretched out until finally, as I glanced over, I noticed Terrence was looking at me. It was a good fight. I offered to him earnestly. You went easy on me. He finally said after staring down at me for a while. You could have swept my team with Milotic, you had the time and prep, but you pulled him, and you used your Lucario, which is weaker. You held back as well. A little. I admitted honestly after a few moments. If things had gotten any tougher, I'd have definitely stopped holding back and let Blissey take the field, or worked out some of the moves I'd learned from Koga to prepare a real sweep. Instead, I'd fought like I had mostly before fighting Koga. Letting my Pokemon brawl their way to a win. Even with all my planning, I couldn't beat you. He muttered despondently, and I stood there for a while. Losing sucked. Like really super sucked, and the winner offering condolences was salt on the wound. So I wasn't going to do that. Instead, I took a breath. I didn't expect you to take out Arcanine like that. Or the Perish Song thing. You tried to let Dragonite fail to do anything against Alakazam. I had planned on doing that against your Blissey. I was going to return Lapras after your Dragonite hit her, and then do the same thing. But Lapras got knocked out. None of my Pokemon could keep up. I had to use Explosion and tricks. So? I asked honestly. Tricks are just fine. If a trainer loses to a trick, it's a trick they'll never forget and learn from. It was a good match. I'll worry about Arcanine rushing Pokemon that can explode from now on. I didn't expect it. It was the only thing I could think of to take out your Arcanine. If I didn't knock her out early, she'd be unstoppable. It didn't even work, not really. He answered a bit bitterly. Heh. So you had to plan a lot to beat her? I'll have to tell her that. It'll make her happy that it took that much. Not that it's going to stop the whining. I muttered. I was dreading dealing with her once she was healed up. How'd you dash? Never mind. I won't stop, this won't be my last conference, and next year I'll take the win. Probably. Before I could say anything more, one of the aides entered the little waiting area. They're ready for you now. The woman in a suit offered with a bow. We followed after her, the third-place trainer joining us in a rush, looking excited, as we headed for the exit. There the announcer called us in. And here now are the top-ranking trainers of this Pokemon League competition. Please join us in saluting them along with their Pokemon for their skill and dedication to the ideals of the Pokemon League. We walked out onto the field directly onto a podium where we each took our position. All the trainers that had taken part of the conference were on the field alongside us, holding the Indigo Conference badge that had been passed out to them beforehand. As we took our places, the field and stands erupted in applause. Cheering and shouting. I raised a hand to the sky and waved at everyone that was cheering, happy that everyone was happy. Then President Goodshow stepped out and walked to each of us. He spoke to the others first, offering them words of encouragement and then both a trophy, alongside a special medal, placed around their neck. And then it was my turn. Even with the crowd quieting down, it was still incredibly loud, but he spoke clearly and loudly enough I could catch it. Miss Ferris. You've truly shown the heart of a real Pokemon trainer today. Be proud, stand tall, and grow even further in the future. I smiled at his words, and for once actually had to bend my head to someone else as he was shorter than I was. When the medal was placed over my neck, a large trophy was handed over, and despite the aides around him struggling with it, and attempting to put it down, I just hefted the massive thing up and threw it over my head. It's finally over. I couldn't help but yell as loud as I could, laughing and cheering as the crowd once more roared. "No. I'm sleeping in today." I whined as a familiar tongue licked at my toes, demanding I wake up as the sun rose, despite the fact I'd been up super late last night. "Arcane. Don't you dare." I yelped as I felt his teeth gently wrap around my ankle that I was trying to hide in my blankets, and then I was yanked right off the bed. I had just a moment to see Pillow sit up and lay back down on my pillow as I was pulled right off of bed and then carried kicking and yelling out of my room. Arcane was a bit careful for a moment as I was dragged out around the new display case in the living room, which might have been a bad purchase as the Indigo League trophy didn't really fit on it. Why make such a massive pain in the ass trophy? But then I was outside and dropped into the damp grass. "You know I'm going to make you regret this, right?" I asked him, but Arcane just sat his tail wagging as I spit the bits of grass out of my mouth as I sat up. The sun was rising. The Milotic were already up and singing to each other, and then to me as they saw me. Dragonite was snoozing among the berry trees, with her hubby wrapped around her. Blue Heart peeked his head out of the water and gave a yawn noise, which was his not growl greeting. I looked over and Arcanine was still hiding in the hole she had dug last night. That was a bit too close to the porch though. I'll have to get her to cut that out later today, before she undermines the whole house. Bliss bliss. Blissey greeted me as she jogged past, the cute little sweatband around her head that she liked to wear when she was exercising. And I'm pretty sure I'd seen Lucario in the kitchen helping out Mama when I was dragged past. What a journey. I whispered to myself. I couldn't have ever imagined I'd really do all that. Wander around Kanto, fight the gyms, win the conference. I'd done that. Nerd Vicky. The Pokemon-obsessed girl. Well, I shrugged and took it for what it is. This was my life, and I still had a whole lot more living to do. But for now, I really needed to go back inside and warm up, because my toes were hecking freezing. Stupid dog slobber. Chapter 86. I had one of Papa's big coats over my shoulders as I sat outside. It was cold, and I'd really prefer to be inside where it was warm, but... Are you ready to come inside yet? I asked into the large hole that Mama had been glaring at me for. It wasn't my fault. Arcanine was being stubborn. I peeked over, squatting down to peer into the hole. Arcanine's big eyes were glowing a little bit from the house's evening lights. I'd spent most of the day at Gram's, and tomorrow we were going to meet the mayor. There was going to be a party, but right now, despite it being chilly and all I wanted to do was curl up somewhere warm, Arcanine was still pouting. Our eyes met for a while, but she looked away. You did fine. There isn't anything to be ashamed of. Awoo. She protested, not even with words, but just a howling grunt of disagreement. Come on, Arcanine, you can't live in a hole. You can't train in there. I offered reasonably. Awoo. She let out a breathy whine. No, you aren't going to quit training, come on. I offered, leaning forward and offering my hand, but before I could touch her snout, she shifted and I yelped as I fell backwards, just avoiding the cloud of dust that had just swept past my face as she used mud slap. That would have been super effective, but she was just digging up dirt and chucking it out of the hole. Rude. You fought fine. He planned for you. He knew what you were going to do and planned around it. It wasn't your loss, but mine. Remember? Whoa. She whined and I sighed. I was going to have to do something desperate. I took off Papa's jacket and put it on the porch and then sighed as I headed for the big hole and just dropped inside. Arc. No. I cried back as I landed on her as I slid down. She tried to move around, but now I was there, and there wasn't enough space for a big old dog and a little girl in this hole. There was a whole lot of being crushed into slightly damp dirt, as Arcanine tried to get me out, but then a moment later she went still when she realized I wasn't moving. Ow. Arc. I wasn't blaming you. It was my choice to get in here. I told her, and then reached up and started scratching at her nose. She huffed, blowing air into her jowls, and held it in. Pouting, but she couldn't escape me now, so I started petting at her snout, cleaning it off the bunch of mud she'd collected while digging. That's a good girl. She exhaled, blowing warm air into my face, but I just kept slowly petting her, watching as she relaxed under my attention no matter how much she wanted to pout and whine. That's my good girl. I told her, and she glanced at me, before looking away, refusing to look at me again. I'm sorry you lost that battle. I should have done something differently. I told her, but she just continued to try and ignore me. At least she was warm even if the dirt I was pressed up against was freezing. Boop. I said as I poked her nose. Awoo. She whined, once more stirring and trying to get away from me, but still unable to. Nope. Boop. I told her, once more booping the snoot. Arc. Oh, so you're talking to me now? Canine. Arc. Then she flipped, exhaling long and hard. She wasn't upset with me. She was upset with herself. Nope. I said, reaching out and grabbing the snout and pulling her down so she was forced to look at me. I love you no matter what. Even if you lost every battle you'd ever been in, I'd still love you. I told her, and with a bit of fin angling, I got up high enough to press my forehead against hers. Arc. Doesn't matter. I'm proud of how well you fought. I told her. Arcanine. She grunted at me, but at least she was actually communicating in more than just whines and moans. Arcanine. You can't win them all, and the more you win, the more people are going to come up with ways to beat you. I messed up, and wasn't expecting an explosion so early. If I hadn't let you get so beat up, you'd have been okay to do some prep moves, and get strong enough to roll all the way through them. It's my fault. Arc, she said, and then stuck her wet nose right into my neck. Cold. I snapped, and then as I pulled away, rubbing at my neck, I looked her over and saw it. She was really not okay with her loss. While Lucario had been knocked out as well, none of the main team besides Dragonite at the end had been. Don't be dash I cut myself off, because downplaying her obvious upset wouldn't help. Okay, if you're upset about your loss, I know the one tried and true perfect way to make you feel better. I told her, and she blinked, her eyes growing large on her face. She leaned in to hear. But I rolled my eyes and started crawling my way off of her so I could escape this hole. It's simple. You learn from what happened and keep training and growing stronger so that it never happens again. I told her, and then I turned and crawled my way out of the very deep hole. Papa and Mama were not going to be pleased. We'd have to call some construction guys to fix it. Once I was at the top, I spat out some dirt as I tried to knock off most of the dirt from me with my hands. Oh man. I was going to get in trouble for getting this messy. I'll need to keep training too. I don't want to put you into a position where you lose again. I admitted to the open sky. It annoyed me whenever my Pokemon got hurt. I still wanted my Pokemon to be so strong that no matter what, no one could beat them. There was a sound of scrabbling claws on dirt, and Arcanine finally pulled herself out of the hole, covered in dirt and mud. You look like a mess. I told her, but she just leaned in and licked me across the nose. You. I whined as I tried to push her back, but couldn't quite manage it as she started licking me happily. No. Bad dog. Who's being bad? Papa called out as he stepped out onto the porch. He took a moment to look me and Arcanine over before he started laughing. Laugh it up. I grumbled, which he did without hesitation. I'm sure I was absolutely covered in mud and dirt. I looked at my pup, who was still a little less full of life than normal, but her tail was wagging a little, enjoying Papa's laughter. You realize this means we're both going to end up in a bath, right? I asked her, and her ears shot forward in shock, looking from me to Papa. Oh yeah. Definitely a bath. Papa said, smirking, because he knew what his words would cause. Arcanine turned and ran. I watched her go without even bothering trying to slow her down. That's for using the W word around Arcane. Papa said, and I narrowed my eyes at him because he was smirking down at me, very amused with the whole situation. Yeah, laugh it up. I'm gonna take a bath. Not before you get her cleaned up, he said, and I groaned because she was going to be a total pain in the ass about this. Arcanine. Get back here. I yelled out as I started running after her. You okay in there? You didn't fall asleep, did you? Mama called out as she knocked on the door. No. I'm just warming up. I called out as I laid back in the bathtub. Kanto bathtubs were pretty awesome. The warm water seeped into me, banishing the cold of trying to get Arcanine to actually wash the mud off. In the end, the hose hadn't been enough, and Milotic had been required to hit her with a surf just to get her to stop turning the water into steam as it got too close. This was the life. No camp out in the cold. Bathrooms, and meals that I didn't have to cook. This was definitely better than living out on the road. Even if the stars were wonderful, and camping was fun. No. Don't let the temptation in. Vicky was an indoor girl right now. I heard a thud at the door and blinked my eyes open. Go away. I called out and closed my eyes, but the scrabbling thud happened again, and a moment later the air in the bathroom shifted, and I heard the door pop open. Damn it. Growl. Growlithe. I was barked at as some of the pack scrambled into the tiled bathroom. Don't even think about it. I managed to get out before one of the pack charged across the tile, their nails clicking as they ran and then leapt. I got a face full of Growlithe, mouth wide and tongue hanging out as it jumped spread-eagled towards the bath, sputtering as the pup hadn't bothered to jump into the bath, and not on top of me. I pushed her off, and then wiped my face, just in time for two more to jump in. No. I yelped, but that did nothing. As soon the bath water was a turbulent white water as three dogs all jumped around in the water and played. What in the world? Mama called out as she hurried over and peeked in. I just gave her a look as I rested my chin on my forearms on the side of the bath. The three Growlithe were acting like angels, sitting in the tub with happy looks on their faces and eyes closed as they pretended everything was fine. Oh no. I'm not dealing with this. Don't let them out until they dry off, and drain the furo when you're done. Yep. I agreed, and Mama sighed and closed the door behind her. Really, you three? During my bath? Growl. Growl. They barked at me happily, and so I sighed and stood up. Pretty sure I have your grooming brush in here, I muttered as I stepped out and pulled out the cupboard, finding a Growlithe brush. This wasn't the first time I'd been in charge of bathing the pups. I stepped back in, because even if I had to clean these idiots, at least I was going to be warm when I did it. The three started play fighting over who was first until I just picked one of them and settled them in front of me, and started brushing. Grow. He panted happily as he settled in. He sat down between my legs, tail wagging, which wasn't comfortable until I sat on it, so I could start brushing. How's this? I asked as I worked through his mane. Growl. He barked, chipper at the attention, and I nodded, getting to it. Lots of fur was coming loose, along with plenty of dirt. Thankfully Papa had upgraded the plumbing to handle Arcane's fur when he evolved, so it'd be fine. The brush ran through fur over and over. I could feel his muscles untense under my hands as I worked. Brushy time was a good time. Getting a little fat, are we? I asked as I noticed he was a bit plump under the fur. I reached up, pressing against his side, feeling the way the fat wrapped around his midsection. Definitely getting chubby. Grow, he growled at me, and I just hummed at him. Papa was good at keeping track of food, so if he was getting plump. So is it Mrs. Kinna down the street? I asked, eyes narrowed, and I felt him tense. Gotcha. You know she feeds you guys junk food. Stop running off to her backyard and begging. If Papa finds out, you'll be on a diet. I reminded the poor thing, which turned to me with big watery eyes. Don't give me that look. I won't tattle. But Papa will find out. He always does. I said with a poke on the cold nose, which had them licking their snoot to remove the bits of water. So I poked it again. Shaking it off, I got back to work. Bleg. You really needed this, I told the pack as I pulled off a chunk of fur. It wasn't even time for them to lose their winter coat yet. Dang shedders. Once the first one was clean, he romped over and tackled the other to play fight in the water, and I was just happy the water splashing out of the tub would go down the exterior drain and wasn't something I'd have to mop up. You next, I told the girl, and she pranced over, sloshing water everywhere, and I started brushing her down. Finally, I finished all three of them and pulled the drain. That was going to need some cleaning, but for now. Alright, you three, amber up, I told them as I made sure to open the window to let out the steam. Slowly the three heated up, and steam started streaming off them, but this thankfully wasn't their first after bath dry off, and Papa had trained them well. They didn't burst into flames and burn the house down. They heated up until the water steamed off them, all three of them standing in front of me with happy puppy smiles as they did their task under my watchful eye. Once they were dry enough, I let them cool off a bit, even as I was starting to sweat from the heat, and grabbed a fresh towel. Rubbing them down and getting the rest of the moisture from the fur, I threw on a towel and opened the door. The cool air was perfect and three Growlithe all rushed out yipping happily. I'm not sure what's worse. Bath dogs, or dogs that hate baths. The first one. At least with the ones that hate the baths, you don't have to deal with it all the time, Papa said as he came down the hall, and I smiled at Lucario that was following him. I'm pretty sure the conference was the last time I'd ever get to battle beside that Pokemon. Now that she was back home, she'd basically been attached to Papa at the hip. Good job taking care of him, Papa said with a wink as he walked by, and Lucario hurried after him. Those two. I headed into my room and grabbed some clean clothes. I was going comfy mode, equipped with warm pajamas. I flopped onto the bed and sighed at how comfy it was. No more stress. Only comfy. I opened my eyes to look out the window. That was a lie. There were a lot of things to be stressed about right now. The conference was over, but repercussions weren't over. I was now a household name. Just going outside had meant people stopped me constantly to talk to me. Then there were the reporters. I wasn't just a household name, I was a name that a lot of people wanted to know more about. I was famous. Luckily, this was the Pokemon world, and even though there were a bunch of reporters in Viridian, there hadn't been any issues, but my school informed me that some reporters had been snooping around. It was all more than I really wanted. Luckily, it should slowly fade away. I'd just won the big conference, but once people got used to that, I should be okay. Unless I beat Lance. Ugh. Being champion was. Yep, not thinking about that anymore. Instead, as I stared out into the night, I had to wonder. What next? I mean, sure, I had plenty of things I wanted to do. There were plenty of Pokemon I still needed to cuddle. But I still had the Z crystal for Jangmo. I'd need to go to Alola and try to convince the Kahuna and the Tapu to give me a Z ring. But that wasn't what I meant. What did I want? I knew I wasn't going to become like Professor Oak. I'd not do well in a completely research field like that. There were still a lot of things that I should probably do something about. The crap Pokédex. I wonder how people would react if tomorrow I just dropped a complete numbered Pokédex of all the Pokemon I knew. I'd definitely miss a few. My memory for Pokemon was pretty good, but not perfect. I could finish the Kanto Dex though. But again, that was just something to do, but not what I wanted to do. What would I look like in 10 years? 20? That was the question. 30-year-old Vicky would be a bad bitch. I nodded, at least confident in that. Would I be some wild woman living out on a reserve, taking care of an entire herd of wild dragons and other Pokemon? Would I be some famous battler? The champion? The world champion? Or maybe just some mom with a kid or two teaching them how to battle as they got ready for their journey? I felt myself smile at that idea, even if I wasn't really planning on a family. Who am I kidding? I'm definitely going to be the crazy dragon lady. I'm gonna bring people to my home covered in little dragons and tell them all their names and show pictures and shit. This was a life, and I had to decide what kind of life it would be. Arceus had blessed me with a second chance, and I'd definitely been living it happily, but now that the journey was over, there was definitely something different. A change. Ah well. I had the rest of my life to figure it out. I wiggled under the covers and curled up. Tomorrow. Tomorrow came and went. Spending the day with my baby team had been nice, but I was back in Viridian because unfortunately there were responsibilities. I hated responsibilities. Do we have to? Yes, now stop fidgeting. Mama said as I took a breath and walked forward, from the car and up the gravel driveway towards a rather large mansion. The lights were on, and even from out here I could hear the people talking and the faint music. Viridian City was hosting a congratulations party for my victory. Yes, the city itself. The mayor was hosting, and all the important people in the city would be there. Like Giovanni. I haven't seen him yet, but he'll be here. Probably. Unless his gym was blown up still or whatever. Ah, the girl of the hour. Come, come. A large man called out as we entered, the doors held open by an actual waiter. Papa put on a smile as he approached. Mayor Hataki. Mr. Ferris, and Mrs. Ferris. Lovely to see you. I do hope the pecha berries have been growing well. Very well. Delightful, I look forward to the spring crop then. And of course Victoria Ferrous, victorious indeed. The large man had a bit of a gut, but as he offered his hand and I took it, I felt the calluses of someone that worked with his hands. That, and I could tell he knew how to battle. Nice to meet you. I offered back and the man smiled behind his beard and threw me a wink. Come in, come in. Everyone has been looking forward to greeting you and of course showing what a real Viridian trainer can do. He laughed loudly, and already people were starting to surround me. The introductions were a haze. Blah blah mayoral aide, blah blah debutante. Of course, just as I was starting to truly blank out with a fake smile and a daydream of just releasing Arcanine and running away, I blinked. And this is Dash. Zealous. I greeted the girl in her fancy slinky dress and hair up in a pretty bun with 2 trails coming down her cheeks. Ah, Simon, Miss Ferris is someone I'm already acquainted with. My daughter went to school with her. Zealous's dad said, the man who the mayor was about to introduce me to. Victoria. Zealous said, sounding all haughty, and I couldn't help the smile that spread across my face. I've been wanting to talk to you. I reminded her, but Zealous rolled her eyes. I've been busy preparing my return to Unova. She said simply, and I rushed her before she could say anything and wrapped my hands with hers, despite her attempts to resist. You're leaving already? When? Is it by plane? We should get everyone together so we can all say goodbye. Don't be stupid. She hissed, and even whispered the last bit so none of the adults could hear. They were all looking at us zealous, they totally heard. I'm leaving in a week, and I don't want some silly party. But zealous, if you leave, most of us won't see you again. You're going all the way to Unova. I reminded her, but she shook her head. It's fine. Zealous is being stubborn about it. Even my attempts to get her to tell her friends here in Kanto have met without success. Her father cut in, and Zealous shot him a betrayed look. Daddy. Ha ha ha. It's good that our Unovan friends have made such excellent friends. The mayor chuckled out. Indeed. A new voice, and one that I instantly turned to look at. Purr. And then a Persian was nudging my side, which I reached up and scritched under his chin. Giovanni. Come. You already know Miss Ferris, she did take home your star badge after all. I do indeed. He said, and our eyes met. I pointedly looked away. He wasn't worthy of another challenge. If I fought him again, it wouldn't be through official means. It would be when I go to completely destroy his organization and force him into prison. I was hoping to see you, Miss Ferris. Your conference win was exemplary. Congratulations. He offered with a suaveness that only made him come off oily. Geez, no wonder his hair was always slicked back, he was leaking oil. Thank you, gym leader. Papa interrupted, putting his hand on my shoulder and dragging me in. Our family is flattered by your praise. Giovanni looked us both over for a while, before shrugging. A pleasant night to you all. It seems I have prior arrangements. He spoke calmly and turned, walking away, snapping his fingers, and his Persian gave me one last bump before following after him, once more looking like a hunting cat. Thanks. I said to Papa, who squeezed my shoulder in response. Well, there are lots of people looking to offer their own congratulations. I simply must ask, have you ever met the head of the beauty society here in Viridian? The mayor asked, as he brought attention to some old lady that wore way too much makeup. Oh my. Is that the new conference winner? What a stunning match. But really, we should talk about your style. A true Viridian woman should dress, dash. I looked at Zealous, she looked at me, and then turned and strode away, leaving me to my fate. Zealous. Chapter 87. That was mean. I whined to Zealous, who just ignored me as she grabbed some of the treats left out on the buffet. Zealous. Vicky stopped complaining. She snapped back and then bit into something that looked tasty. I grabbed one and tried it. Yuck. I decided even if I swallowed it down. If you didn't like it, why grab it? I've never had one before, so I didn't know. I answered back and she blinked before scoffing. Farm girl. City girl. I responded back with a smirk and she glared at me in turn. So, you're leaving, huh? Good luck on your conference. I believe in you. Ugh. I don't need luck. She said, repeating what we'd said to each other during the conference. She stilled when she realized it and took a breath. I won't lose like that again. I'll get stronger and win. I believe you. I said earnestly. You can go all the way. Uh-huh. What about you? You beat the conference. Will you become the Kanto champion? She asked, and I sighed, slumping a bit. I don't know. I grabbed a different snack and tried it. Better, I swallowed it and decided to actually answer. I don't want to become champion, but... Politics. Yeah, your weird indigo thing. It's not so different from Unovan's old relationship with Gaylor. A new voice, one I didn't want to hear, spoke up and I turned. Gym leader. I greeted him flatly and he nodded to me, but Zella spoke up first. That's ridiculous. Gaylor were tyrants and we broke free from them. The civil war of the Indigo region had similar reasons. Giovanni offered with a smirk. Zealous looked like she was going to argue history with Giovanni, but honestly I wasn't interested. Can I help you? You don't seem to like me, Miss Ferris. He responded back just as quickly, looking down at me. His left hand held down and his Persian holding position at his side. Despite the fact I could see how much he wanted to come over for more attention. You battled poorly, I said back, and the way his face twitched a bit told me I hit a nerve. Just like you did in your final conference match. For similar reasons. You aren't the only one that faces the Elite Four from time to time. I rarely like giving away my training secrets. It sounded genuine, but I also knew this was the leader of Team Rocket, and he never tried to become Elite Four. Not really. No, that was a lie to hide his actual reasons for keeping his Pokémon mostly hidden away. That seems a bit rude. Zealous cut into my surprise. The role of the gym leader is to train the young trainers to the best of their ability. If you need to hide your training from the Elite Four in order to have any hope of winning, maybe you should focus more on just being a gym leader? I looked at her in shock and felt myself fighting back laughter. Zealous, you don't even know Giovanni is a bad guy, but just roasted his ass. Hell yeah. It obviously irritated Giovanni, even more than my own words, and when he spoke it made a bit more sense. I saw your match against the one who came in second. Terrence, was it? He created a perfect strategy to defeat your strongest Pokémon from your previous matches. You showed your rare Unovann-sourced Pokémon, and in doing so, showed their strengths and weaknesses. A common failing to forget that knowledge is power. Zealous went still, and I saw her face flushing in anger at his words. You dash. Giovanni, bullying children again? The voice cackled and the entire area around us went still. Agatha. He said, speaking calmly, but obviously controlling himself. Hey Agatha. Hey Jengar. I greeted, waving at her, and looking at her shadow, where a little hand slipped out and waved back. Go on boy, I think the children want someone else to bother them. Giovanni once again looked irritated but turned to me and simply gave me a long look before walking away. I don't think he likes me much. Oh, it's probably the opposite. That boy has always been interested in strong trainers. He's probably annoyed that he can't seem to get you on his side. Agatha offered, and I frowned at that idea. Heh. Good evening. Zealous Bia. Zealous offered, introducing herself formally. Agatha looked her up and down and shrugged. Weird kid. She is, but she's my friend. I agreed, and Zealous of course got red in the face again as she glared at me. Mind giving me a few minutes with the brat? Agatha said, looking at Zealous, who glared but shot her head up and walked away. I was trying to talk her into a going away party. I muttered, but I turned back to Agatha, noticing her look. What's up? Congratulations on your win, brat. She said simply, and I just blinked at her for a minute. I kinda expected something more. Don't give me that look. It's good to tell children they've done well when they succeed at something. She said, huffing, irritated at my uncomprehending look. Thanks? Good. Now, when will you begin your challenge? She asked, her smile turning sinister. Not for a while. I said honestly after a moment of thinking on it. I'm going to take some time to just decompress. I said with a shrug. She looked me over with her sharp eyes, practically drilling into me. Is that it? The extent of your desire to win? Pretty much, yeah. The only reason I want to fight Lance is because he was mean to Dragonair. You already know that. I don't care about becoming champion or anything, Agatha. Faye. You have a lot of hopes pinned on your girl. Are you going to give up before even dash? I didn't say I wasn't going to face him. Or that I wasn't going to try my best, Agatha. I cut in, actually a little irritated, but I swallowed that fiery bite. Agatha had always helped me. I love Pokemon, and I love battling, but I worked hard on my journey. There are things I want to see and do without the time limit of the conference hanging over my head. Agatha seemed to swallow back her own irritation. Fine. I shouldn't push. You've certainly made your own way up until now. She admitted, and I felt my own tension ease up. I still need to train my Pokemon, like Mimikyu. That you do. She agreed, which turned into a wicked smirk. I expect to see that ghost of yours teaching Lance the error of his ways when you battle him. He'll probably be on the team. I don't have a better anti-lance Pokemon. Besides Dragonite, I mean. She's still irritated. Good. Train him well. If you need any assistance, don't hesitate to reach out. I have to beat you too, you know? If you can't beat me, girl, then there is no point in even discussing you fighting against the champion. She replied, locking her eyes on me. And if that's the case, well, you'd still need my help regardless. Thanks, Agatha. I think I'll be okay. I have some ideas of what to do, unless you want to teach me how you do that walk through walls thing. Never. She said, her smile breaking into a wide evil grin. Evil? I hissed at her, but that at least broke the tension. Eventually, she left, heading out to see Gram, leaving me once remembering that just because I won the conference doesn't mean that the pressure on my back was gone. Koga, Agatha, most of the gym leaders, and more all expected something from me. A fight against Lance ending with his loss, giving the Kanto half of the Indigo region an advantage. Ugh. Politics. It was so annoying. I shook it off, it was water off my back. Other people could have all the expectations they wanted, the only thing that mattered was my own opinion. Lance needed an ass whooping to make him realize his Blackthorn breeding program was nothing compared to the power of a well-trained Dragonite. And if that made me champion, well, that would suck. And then this move right here is what won Mr. Kiss of the battle. That final overwhelming strike was prepared the whole time. Which is nice to say, but it was obviously a desperation move. That Machoke was on its last leg, if it had missed, that would be it. If. As always with you, pulling out if. I watched the talk show hosts talk about a battle as I lay on my bed. Kook? I've got no idea. I answered Mimikyu honestly. That move looked like a desperation move, but he had been preparing it during the match, so maybe it was a bit of both? Vicky. You got a Miyu comfortable? Mama asked as she entered my room and looked at me, her lips twitching into a smile. I blinked up at her. I was laying on my back on my bed with my head off the bed so I could watch TV with Mimikyu on my stomach as he worked on some sewing project. Pillow was laying on my feet, mostly because after a while I'd stuck my feet under him, 'cause he was warm, but he didn't mind. He was laying on his back sleeping too. Jangmo and Dratini were both watching the TV with happy noises as the battles went on. Both of them practically bouncing at the action. Very. I admitted with a smile, and Mama just snorted at me. Rio? Oh, Riolu, can you drop that off in the laundry room? Lucario is folding it. Rio. Riolu walked by carrying a laundry hamper full of clean clothes. I'd already done my chores this morning, so I was resting, but Riolu really liked helping, and Lucario was basically a house Pokemon now. Our eyes met as she walked past and she shot out her tongue at me, which I returned. Really, Vicky? What? She started it. I defended myself, but Mama just gave me a look, before shaking her head. I need some detergent, mind taking a run to the store to pick some up for me? Mama asked me and I nodded, as I helped Mimikyu move his stuff off my belly without damaging anything. Sure, I can do that. I yawned a bit as I stood up and stretched. Thanks, I'll get you a list. Mama said, smiling, and I stilled as she disappeared, because that wasn't the deal. Ugh, I'd just been conned into doing a full grocery run. Oh well. I'd been mostly lazing around the last few days. Everything had calmed down enough that I could finally just be lazy. Not that I was telling Mama that. For her, I made sure to tell her all the tasks I'd done that day so she wouldn't find out I was being lazy. The perfect crime. I looked around my room at my friends and finally asked. Who wants to come with? Cuckoo. Teeny. Jang. Heh, I guess that's all of them. Pillow of course didn't even notice, continuing to just sleep, his belly open to the sky and dreaming puppy dreams. I started pulling on my boots and grabbed my outer shirt and a jacket, it was cold outside. As I was doing that, Mimikyu came bouncing over with my hat and landed on my head. Dratini instantly whirled up my leg and into my jacket, wrapping a few times around my neck like a scarf but inside my jacket so he could stay warm, but his head was poked out to see what was going on. Then Jangmo just wiggled and made a leap towards me, as I caught him in my arms. Comfy? I asked him flatly, as he shifted in my grip until I was holding him back to my chest and he was looking forward. Jang! He barked eagerly, his tail twitching in excitement. Yeah, I thought so. I sighed and headed out, double-checking I had my wallet and everything. I stopped at the kitchen to see Mama turn with a list in her hand. She gave me one look before laughing. Maybe a pokeball would help? Nah, it's more fun this way. I told her as I hefted up Jangmo, his little feet tippy-tapping the air in his excitement. Besides, it's not very often my team gets to see a human mart. It's just Kitoyokata. Not a human mart. We don't call them that. Mama said, tiredly. Heh, not an argument she was going to win. If Pokemarts are for Pokemon stuff, obviously human marts are for human stuff. I informed her of my perfect logic, with a naughty smirk on my face. Go on. Mama said, not willing to let me tease her anymore. She thrust the list at me, and I took it. Yep. Let's go. To the human mart. I called out, laughing as Mama threw a towel at me as I raced out the front door. Mimikyu? Can you hold the list? I asked as I held it up, and soon as Shadow Claws grabbed the paper and sucked it under my hat. I walked a bit out onto the lawn and reached for a Pokeball. Dragonite and Milotic were at the stable today, so I couldn't use Dragonite to fly there, and Arcanine was also at the stable. Not that I couldn't just call her or something. It wouldn't be a very long run to get here after all. But, hee. I pulled out a Pokeball and threw it. A rumble echoed out as Gyarados looked around his throat, preparing a roar in case of battle, but when he saw me, and nothing else, he lowered his head down. I could see his eyes looking towards all the Pokemon I was carrying. I need to go to the store, want to fly me there? I asked him, and he blinked, looking almost sleepily with his eyelids halfway down, but that was just his relaxed face. He clicked out a rumble-like purr. And I grinned as I adjusted Jangmo and started climbing. With a bit of work with only one hand, I was settled up on his horn, held tight as he flowed into the beginnings of a dragon dance. That's right. Blue Heart. Claim the sky. I roared out in delight as he roared along with me. As he shifted and his body left the earth, the sky opened up the moment we lifted off, and there was nothing but beautiful blue skies and light clouds, as we floated up and away from home over Viridian City. With a bit of adjusting, I was able to get a hand free. It's that way. I told him, and he shifted his angle, and then we were off. I relaxed, settled down onto his horn, even as Dratini cheered at the fact he was getting his first Gyarados flight, and Jangmo was tippy-tapping against my arm with his paws as he looked out over the world. Blue Heart was a much more relaxed ride than Arcanine and Dragonite. He wasn't fast, but that was actually a benefit in a lot of ways. So we flew gently and slowly over the city. The cold wind in my face wasn't blasting me with freezing cold, and so it was actually pretty nice. Just a slow drive across town. Just, in the sky. There it is. The one with the sign. I called out, and Blue Heart shifted lightly, his flight taking us slowly downward, as we flew over the roads and towards the strip mall. The old Kitoyokata sign glowed lightly, and I could see some Pidgey nesting on top of it from this angle as we shifted down. That's a good spot. I called out, and Blue Heart moved towards the open area of the parking lot near the back, where no cars were. Just a series of open spots. Most parking lots in Kanto were really small, since people didn't tend to drive much, and this one was the same, but it also had enough space that Blue Heart could settle down on the asphalt without crushing any cars, or getting in any parked cars' way. Once he settled in, I jumped off, since climbing down with Jangmo in my arms would be hard. Thanks, Blue Heart. You want to rest here, or come with? I asked him. Normally it probably wasn't a good idea to leave a Pokemon in the parking lot outside a store, but who exactly was going to pokenap Blue Heart? He gave a humming noise as he brought his head closer, and I couldn't help but smile at the happy noise as I leaned in and pressed my forehead against his cheek. Should have shown you off sooner, but we'll fly together way more often now. I promise. I told him as I stepped back and brought up the Pokeball. With him returned, I headed for the human mart, and walked across the parking lot to the strip mall. I could see plenty of people already staring at me. Well, staring at where Blue Heart used to be. Viridian City still wasn't used to flying Gyarados after all. As I got closer, and people saw who it was, I could see them talking all the while staring. I felt a little cheeky, so one of the little boys standing beside his mother with one of the little Kanto shopping carts got a wave, which had him wave back. Mimikyu of course joined in as well, earning some surprised looks from that. But I ignored that and walked to the little cart area. Seriously, these things were tiny. I wonder if Unova had the big shopping carts like America. I'd have to find out. I settled Jangmo in the cart, which he very quickly spun around to examine, and then squeaked out in delight as I started pushing him along. Okay Mimikyu, list? I asked, and it was pulled out of my hat and held out in front of me. Geez, Mama wanted a lot. Let's go. I called out, and my Pokemon all cheered as I hurried into the store, speeding up a little to give Jangmo a bit of excitement as I walked down the aisles. Sure, I was getting a lot of attention, but Kanto had that Japanese culture thing where most of the time they'd just stop and stare, maybe whisper to someone but not actually confront me. Detergent. Some veggies for tonight. Oh. We're having that for dinner? Nice. I whispered as I collected everything from the list. Dratini's cooing in my ear as he continued to look around at all the amazing stuff. Teeny? Oh sure. I reached out and grabbed a box of. I think it was some sort of baking thing? Yeast or something? But it had a cute anime picture on the box that Dratini wanted to see. Once he was satisfied, I put it back and carried on, grabbing this and that. Once I had everything on the list, I grinned and headed down another aisle. Teeny. Jang. It's the snack aisle. I told them as I wandered down it. Now let's find some treats to try out, okay? I asked, and got lots of cries of delight from my little ones. Of course I still had to check the package. Some things were just no good for Pokemon, but if it had a Pokemon mark on it on the back where the nutritional facts were, it would be at least okay for most Pokemon to eat. Considering I was dealing with a pair of dragons and a ghost, I was fairly confident they'd be fine with everything on the aisle, but I still checked. Okay, one box of Icy Crunch for Dratini, and a package of Starmie cookies for Jangmo, and Mimikyu wants these. I held up a pack of gummies that were made to look like Pokemon. The fact it had a big Pikachu on the front made me wonder if he liked them, because of his own disguise, or if he just wanted to chew up Pikachu-shaped gummies. He wasn't aggressive against Pikachu like Jesse's Mimikyu had been, but I also never really asked him about how he felt about them. With my baby's treats stored away, I finished shopping and headed to the register, which once again earned me a lot of staring. Welcome to Kitoyokata. The cashier offered, stuttering a bit at looking at the Pokemon she probably never saw before staring up at her. Jangmo did a little tippy tap on top of the laundry detergent bottle, thankfully leaving it unharmed. In the end, I had to cough a bit to get the cashier to start ringing me up as she was in a stare-off with Jangmo. Sorry. She yelped and got to sorting my items across the scanner, but she kept glancing up to meet Jangmo's eyes as he was staring. Huh. I reached down and picked him up, which only gave me a little struggle as I brought him forward. He's Jangmo. A dragon type. He's a sweetie though. Say hi Jangmo. Jang. He barked, and the cashier blinked her big purple eyes and smiled cutely as she reached out before hesitating. It's okay. I assured her, and her hand went the rest of the way scratch at his cheeks, exploring around as she tested his big scale crest and then his chin, which earned her a purr. He's adorable. Yep, super cute. But also very strong and fierce. I said pointedly as Jangmo stiffened a bit, but he relaxed when I assured him how strong he was. The cashier girl obviously picked up on it and giggled. Oh, I'm sure he's a big strong Pokemon, and he'll grow to be the strongest. Especially since his trainer is a conference winner. She said a little breathlessly, meeting my eyes, definitely testing boundaries. Hee hee. I offered, scratching at the back of my head a little. Yeah. What was it like? Winning in your first year? She asked, almost pleading. A lot of work, and a year of basically living in the forest training. I said honestly. I'm hoping to actually get some more fun exploring done this year. Will you challenge the Elite Four? Do you think you can win? she asked, and I couldn't help but laugh at how excited she sounded. Even a cashier in Pokemon World was obsessed with Pokemon battles. I have to at least get to Lance. It's a challenge I have. So, I trailed off, and she nodded excitedly. Good luck. Thank you. I returned with a bow, and gathered up my stuff. I headed back out, and ignored the cries of surprise when Gyarados was released. I had a lot more people watching now, of course, but I ignored them. Instead, I smirked and had some fun as I had Blue Heart bend down and start tying the grocery bags to his horns. Once I was able to just hold the last bags, I put the cart away and jumped on, and we flew back home. When I got home, I quickly rushed to my Pokédex journal to add a new entry. Gyarados are excellent at carrying groceries. S+ Grocery Assistant Pokemon. Chapter 88. Gib. Is that so? I asked, as I sat beside Gibble out on the grass. I honestly don't know if she even noticed me being gone for the conference, but when I came back, she'd been close. Walking over to stand near me, or settling next to me. Training was over. My little baby dragons had done well, but Gibble was still just sitting next to me. Gib Gib. She muttered, as if she didn't hear me, but when I shifted to look at her, her eyes shifted to me, and there was nothing of the feral there. She was calm. You want to play a game? I asked her, and she blinked lazily at me. Gib. Okay, come on. I reached out with a hand and she noticed and then reached out to grab my hand. We walked towards the porch and only once we were there, did I settle in for the game. Grabbing the pack of berries I'd prepared beforehand. So you want one? I asked her, and she started drooling. Gibble. Sit. I said using a firm voice, and she of course didn't do anything. That's the game, okay? I'll give you an order and if you do it, you'll get a berry. Gib? Okay, you get one to start. I offered her one and she reached out slowly, as we'd been working on, and a moment later she grabbed the berry with her claws and stuffed it into her mouth. Gib, she muttered as she drooled and chewed. I really hope she wasn't chewing on her hands again. Okay. So if you want another one. Gibble, sit. I offered, and once again, she just stared at me. This still wasn't working. Jang Mo. I called out loudly, and then just smiled as I saw him come rushing out of the woods. Jang. Hey buddy. I'm trying to teach Gibble here a game, do you want to be my example? Jang? Jang. Thanks. I whispered at his confident assurance. Jang Mo. Sit. I called out, and he sat down, and so I passed him a berry, which he happily bit into and started chewing up. Gibble stared, a little bit of drool sliding down the corner of her mouth. Gibble. Sit. I said, and she just continued staring. Jang Mo. Can you try explaining it to her? Jang Jang. He yipped, before turning to Gibble and chattering at her, which was probably about as effective as talking to a wall as she just focused on the berry. Jang? He offered, turning from her and looking at me, and shrugging. Right. Well, let's try again. Gibble, sit. I ordered and waited. She blinked slowly and then looked from Jangmo to me as she realized I spoke. Gib, she muttered as she waddled over and made grabby hands at me. Gib, Gib. Ah, my heart melted. I slumped. Maybe it was still too early for this? I picked her up and settled her in my lap and then gave her a berry to snack on, while I instead worked on her food defensiveness. Stroking and touching, even reaching out and adjusting the berry in her hand, which to my surprise, other than continuing trying to eat, she didn't react badly to my actions. She was definitely getting better. You want some more too? I offered Jangmo, who yipped and leapt up onto the porch to settle in next to me. I ended up just having a snack lunch with my two little dragons instead of training, but we'd get there. I guess food wasn't really a good choice to try and train her with. I'd have to come up with something else. Maybe get Dragonite involved? No, I really want to figure this out between us. I told Gibble as I hugged her. One day you're going to understand, and you'll listen to my words, and when that happens, we'll go battle, and the two of us will have so much fun. You'll love it. I told her, and she glanced from her berry up at me for a moment before focusing on her food. Heh. The moment you use Draco Meteor against some poor kid's Rattata. I snickered evilly at the idea, because that would be a hell of a move to pull out of my pocket. Gib, she said, looking up at me. Her berry gone, but instead of asking for more, she snuggled into my arms. Her little claws covered in berry juice grabbed my forearm, and then slowly, just curled up against me. Well, it wasn't training, but it was trust, and that was more important. Jang? I looked up at the armored pup as he sort of tippy-tapped for a minute. He definitely wanted something. I opened up my arm and he hurried over and joined the cuddle pile. To my surprise, despite rubbing up against Gibble, she didn't react negatively, just giving a quiet Gib as he disturbed her, and then I had two babies in my arms. Everything okay? I asked, looking up from the living room TV. The doorbell had rang and Mama had rushed for it, telling me to keep watching TV, which was all a little weird as she was usually telling me to get the door. It's fine, she said with a fake smile that made me stand up and head to the door. I peeked out the window and saw men in suits heading back into their car. Government? Are they a bunch of League guys? I asked, and I could hear Mama sigh. Technically, yes. The League researchers are chomping at the bit. It's nothing to worry about. They should know better to try and strong-arm us. Researchers? Why would they come here? Well, those lot weren't. Those were just stooges, Mama said, and I couldn't help but chuckle at her rude interpretation. What did they want? Nothing, she said again, just a bit too fast. Well, that's a lie, I muttered, following her into the living room where she took a seat. It is a lie. Because they should know better than to bother us at home, she grumbled. Well, what did they actually want? You, Mama said, and I had to feign a smile at that. Yeah, the fame was pretty crazy. Even if most of the people left me alone when I had to go out, there was still this constant staring and discussion about me wherever I went. Well, I'm not for sale, I told her with a smirk. You're stuck with me. Terrible. Maybe I should shop around a bit, see what I could get for you? Mama teased and then opened her arms for a hug, which I slid into. So they want me for something? You won the conference, Vicky. Everyone is going to want something from you, but you don't owe them anything. So just don't worry about it. If I go talk to a professor, do you think it'll make them leave me alone? I asked, and Mama stiffened a bit. You don't have to. I actually wanted to go see Professor Seras. He was nice, and I know he's a good guy. Seras? Vermilion Seras? That's the one. Ah, that's right, he was in charge of the Milotic examination. Mama muttered. It probably would get the League to back off. She trailed off. Well, I did tell him I might consider visiting, I said, and then nodded. Yeah, I think I will. I want to complain about the Pokédex anyways. Mama snorted and hugged me tight. Well, if you say you want to, then it's okay, Mama said, before pushing me up, and I rose up then stalled out in confusion as Mama grabbed the remote and changed the channel. I was watching that. I whined. I thought you were going to see this professor? Mama said innocently, and I realized her goal here. You just want me out of the house so you can watch your shows. I gasped out at the betrayal. Professor Seras is in Vermilion, better hurry before it gets dark, Mama said with a smile, but it wasn't even noon yet. I slumped. Fine, I grumbled, and as I turned to go, I saw Meowth leap down from the curtains, where he often hid from the Growlithe, to settle on Mama's lap. He sent me a little smirk as he settled in. Ugh. What a pair of sneaks. Those two are made for each other. I headed to my room and started getting dressed. Just my casual stuff, even if I took a moment to look at my dragon trainer outfit that was hanging up in my closet. Not sure if I'd end up wearing that exact outfit again. I mean, I'd grow a whole bunch in a year, so most of it wouldn't fit after that. Yep. Definitely. It was still chilly though. I reached out and grabbed my cape and threw it over my shoulders. Yeah, capes were warm while flying. I grabbed my stuff, including what Pokemon I had with me. I was actually pretty empty at the moment. Arcanine was with Papa helping do some Growlithe training, since I hadn't planned on actually doing anything today. Almost everyone else was at the stable to relax today, but I'd need to pick up Dragonite if I was going to Vermilion, and who would be the best to talk about to a professor? I shrugged and grabbed my other supplies, including my Pokédex notes. Maybe I'd talk to Seras about an electronic dex? It would certainly be better than the stupid paper one. I raced off, and waved to Mama as I passed the living room. I'm off to the Pokemon Center. Be safe. With a quick release, the only Pokemon that was with me today was released. Hey Blue Heart. Want to go on a flight with me? I asked with a big grin. As usual, people were staring at Blue Heart both on the flight over and when I arrived. Thanks Blue Heart. You're the best. I told him as I reached up and squished his cheeks as he rumbled at me. A moment later, he was back in his Pokeball and I was back inside. Hello Nurse Joy. Oh Victoria. The Viridian Nurse Joy greeted me with a happy smile and a wave, but she refocused on helping a trainer she was working with. I hurried to the vid phones. Ferris residence. Oh hey Elizabeth. I greeted the girl's face as she appeared on the vid phone. Oh Vicky. Pokemon transfer? Yep, Dragonite for sure, and I need a few others. I'm going to visit Professor Cerise today. So. Brave if you can find her easily, but otherwise Gibble and Jangmo, and Mimikyu if he wants to break from his project. Got it. I'll go grab them. She disappeared off for a while as I sat there swinging my legs, and a moment later. Alright, sending them over. Couldn't find Brave, she was out in the forest somewhere. Elizabeth said as she reappeared. And I watched as she loaded the Pokeballs into the system. Thanks Elizabeth. Have a nice day? I said a bit awkwardly, but she just took it with a nod. You too. Bye. The phone line ended was almost a relief. Phew. The Pokeballs arrived and I quickly headed out to head to Vermilion City. Dragonite landed on the sidewalk with a puff of air and I looked around. I think this is it? I offered. I hadn't actually looked into where Cerise's lab was before taking off, and had to stop to ask an Officer Jenny about it. Dragonite offered with a shrug, but did stand up straight to look around. Well, I'll head up and knock and see if it's the right place. I was about to return Dragonite when we both heard it. Yamp. Yamp yamp yamp. The barking quickly grew very close and out of the bushes up the path to the large, almost castle-like house popped out. Yamper? I muttered as the little dog Pokemon started barking up a storm at both Dragonite and I. Yamp yamp. That's right, Cerise had a Yamper in the anime. Does that mean he actually went to Galar here too? I guess it must, I don't know how else he'd get one. Hi Yamper. I offered as I kneeled down and it barked and growled at me, sparking a lot. I'm looking for Professor Cerise. I offered, and the name snapped the pup out of his guard dog tactics. Sorry Yamper, you might be a walking taser, but I was way more scared of guard Growlithe than I am you. You little squishy boy. The urge to hug the pup was there, but that was a terrible idea. What kind of idiot would just grab a random Pokemon and start hugging them without getting their permission first? Yamper. A new voice called out, and I stood up, looking for the row of hedges, which I noticed looked brand new. Many of them were still growing. The fact they were so new meant as I stood up even I could see over the top of them. Well, I could even if they were grown in if they were properly maintained. I'm just a little small still. But there was a young boy. He met my eyes over the shrubs as he came around the corner, and then looked up at Dragonite, his eyes widened. Hi. I'm Lude Dash. Ah. He squealed, and it could only be described as a squeal, as he pointed. You're Victoria Ferrous. You won the conference. Oh, yeah, that's me Dash. Oh. Wait. I have to. I need. He stuttered as he sort of started pacing and then spun around jogging in place before rushing off to the building. Yamp? Yamp. Yamper chased after him a moment later, forgetting Dragonite and I were even here. I looked at her, and shrugged, and she did the same. I still don't even know if this is the right place. I muttered tiredly, but the yamper was pretty conclusive, I supposed. How many other places are going to have a Galar Pokemon just in the front yard? I walked forward, Dragonite following me as we both looked around the place. It was nice. Obviously a lot of money had put into fixing it up. The actual building was old brickwork and looked old, but it was clean and well maintained. I headed up the meandering sort of path to the front door, which I noticed was left ajar. Hello? I called out as I pushed open the door a bit, but didn't enter. The boy probably left the door open when he rushed off. Geez. I waited a moment wondering what to do when I heard the scramble of dog claws on wood, and shoes rushing forward. Hey! Parker! What are you doing? Slow down. Another voice shouted out, and then down the stairs I could just see the boy literally slid down as he was in a rush, and I winced as he nearly ate shit because of it, before he skidded to a stop. Please. Sign my copy. He roared out and bent over offering. I winced. And Dragonite peered down before she started snickering as I did everything to not look at it. Parker. Why are you running inside though? A much more mature voice called out, and down the steps came Professor Seras. The man's face shifted into a bright smile. Miss Ferris. Just call me Vicky. I offered a little hesitantly, as I tried to avoid what was happening. Please. The boy repeated. Parker. Leave Vicky alone. Cerise offered with a sigh, but I had to sigh myself. Sure, I guess? I offered as I looked down at my own face on the front of a VHS. The star badge tape. The consequences of my own actions, the true villain of my life, we meet again. Thank you. He shouted far too loudly, and Dragonite was clutching her belly, and just laughing, and laughing. Forgive my son Parker, he was very excited to watch the conference in person this year. It's fine. I waved him off with both hands. I was sitting on an expensive couch across from the professor, and he was looking sympathetic, but very happy I was here. You really made his day. I've already had to put in the order for the conference VHS. Unfortunately, it's a little backlogged. I think that's mostly your doing. He added a bit teasingly, and I just puffed and exhaled all the feelings I didn't want to deal with. Yeah. So, I'm here? I offered, and he sat up straight. Yes. Thank you so much for visiting. I hope the trip wasn't too long. Oh no, Dragonite got me here in like 10 minutes. That's amazing. The man's eyes practically sparkled. Dragonite are known for being incredibly fast, but to get direct first-hand accounts is difficult. At least those that aren't set during wartime. He added the last bit quietly. Well, Kanto has some Dragonite now. I couldn't help but say. All thanks to you, Dragon Master. Ceres offered. To my surprise, he wasn't teasing but serious as he gave me a little bow. You don't have to say it like that. I offered, embarrassed, but the man instead smiled kindly at me. It's an amazing achievement. I was actually hoping I might be able to discuss with you some old rumors and lore around some dragon types, to see if we can't clarify some of it. But that wasn't what I wanted to focus on. The unreported Pokemon from Kitakami. If you don't mind, I'd love to do some studies on them. Learn everything we can about them to add them to the Pokédex. Ugh. I couldn't help but wrinkle my nose at the mention of that thing. But yes. I don't mind. As long as it's not invasive. And I'm there. I don't want anyone getting bothered. Like with my Milotic. Of course. I wouldn't want to do anything that would upset your Pokemon. You have an opinion of the Pokédex? He said the last part hesitating a bit. It's terrible. I admitted bluntly. Unless it's a common Pokemon, it seems to be completely made-up nonsense. Ah well. Professor Westwood tries his best. He's just a little eccentric. A little I cut myself off because bad-mouthing the guy was probably not fair. It kinda sucks though. I muttered irritatedly, and Cerise actually smiled at that. It does. The slow updates and the fact that a lot of information is false is one of the things I focus on as a professor. Is that why you went to Galar? I asked, and the man blinked and just shook his head. No, I was chosen for the Galar expedition as an intern. It is what gave me the respect I have today, but it's not really connected. I'm surprised, you even know that. Most people don't really know about my work. You have a yamper. I pointed out, and while the dog Pokemon wasn't in the room, I could still faintly hear him barking up a storm. Ah, a gift from a colleague in Galar, Professor Magnolia. He said with a wistful smile. Sounds like you miss it, Galar I mean. Ah, well. I didn't spend as much time there as I would have liked. The expedition was only for a single year. I know the distance is incredible, but the world is growing smaller every year, and I'd hoped to continue learning. The Galar region is amazing. Dynamax is a bit. I'm not a fan. I said, waving my hand back and forth. Definitely one of the worst region mechanics. You read my report? He said, suddenly looking excited, his face lighting up. I was responsible for exploring the Dynamax phenomenon while I was there. Oh. I don't think I read your report. Oh. One of those articles about it? I promise it wasn't a lie, I saw it with my own eyes. What? Wait, people are trying to say it was fake? Indeed. He offered a bit grumpily, and I scoffed. It's completely real, obviously. I said, and my words perked him up. He looked like a puppy getting a treat. Thank you. I had a lot of pushback when I submitted my report here. Stupid. As if everything in the world exists within Kanto. We don't even have a quarter of all the Pokemon in the world native here. Of course there are things out there we don't, Professor? I asked as suddenly my hand was grabbed by the older man and his eyes sparkled like he was a kid. Exactly. You get it. You really understand. Miss Ferris, no Vicky, please. Become one of my research fellows. You have an outstanding ability to gather rare Pokemon, and more than that, train them to amazing heights. Despite everything I try, I'm just a researcher, my battle ability is not great. He admitted a bit embarrassed. I need someone like you, so we can discover all the secrets this world still has for us to discover. He was really excited. I don't really know anything about research, I tried to demur. That's fine. You have your own talents, and it's really not that hard. Nothing you won't already do. Most of it is just putting words to what you've already learned, and sharing it so we can verify things, and he started rambling and I realized it. This guy. He loved this world. It was funny, but I loved this world. This new world I found myself in. Yet despite that, the bitterness I'd felt living my last life, in my old world. To think. I'd need to die and be reborn to find the love for the world I lived in now, but this guy. He just loved his world right from the start. No reincarnation, no perspective needed. I'll help you. At least somewhat, but I think I'd like to see what happens before I really agree? Thank you. Vicky, you won't regret it at all. He cheered excited like a kid almost, and I couldn't help but laugh along with him at the energy in the room. Well, I guess we should talk about my Pokemon first? Yes, exactly. Come, I'll show you my lab, and you can meet my assistants. I rose up and followed after him. I don't think I could do the whole professor thing. But maybe I could be the trainer that brings him all the information. The red to Professor Oak. The one that completes the Pokédex of sorts, although I wasn't about to start capturing every Pokemon. But I could certainly fill in blanks and show the secrets that I already knew about. That idea was something. Kind of fun. Chapter 89. And this is the main lab. Seras proclaimed as we walked into a room with what looked like supercomputers along the walls, a small work desk area, and a rest area with a crash couch. Ah yes, the crash couch. I'd spent my own amount of time on one of those before. Neat. I couldn't help but say, mostly because that was an insane computer setup. It's still under construction, and the data is difficult, but I hope to start tracking not just Pokemon migration data, but atmospheric changes, plant growth, and any factor I can think of that could lead to a change in Pokemon habitat. Huh. You could probably track the legendary birds with that. Following atmospheric changes, I mean. I commented, and Ceres's eyes sparkled again as he nodded. That's a possibility, yes. Although that part of my research I'll need to keep quiet about. Yeah, messing with legendary Pokemon isn't smart. I agreed. I still had the urge to go explore a few places I knew legendary Pokemon would be hanging out. Seafoam Island's probably housed an Articuno, and Big Icebird is fluffy and cute. Was pretty much the only thought that ran through my head when I thought about that. Oh well. Maybe someday I'd go poke it and see what happens. Disaster, probably. Of course, while it's not completed, it does have up-to-date scanners. Do you mind? That's fine. I agreed to the unspoken question as Ceres ran around a bit to gather up a scanning system as I pulled out a Pokeball. Mimikyu. I called out, and my little guy popped out looking around before seeing me. Coo. He cheered, and I swung him around as he leapt at me into a big hug. Hey buddy. We're at a Pokemon lab. This is Professor Ceres. He's a nice person. But he wants to learn about Pokemon, including you. I offered, poking him right between his actual eyes. But it's okay. Nothing like last time, okay? Ku? Yep. I'll be here the whole time. Hello, I'm Ceres, and I promise I won't try to peek under your. He trailed off looking to me. Disguise is probably the correct term, but anything is fine. Your disguise. I'm simply going to get some more scans, and ask some questions. If that's okay? He asked, and Mimikyu slowly nodded as Ceres smiled back happily. Not too long later, I was standing next to the scanner with Mimikyu holding my hand as he sat inside it. It was basically a pedestal on wheels that would scan the Pokemon on top of it. Is there ever an issue with the scanner being too small? This one is just meant for lab work. I don't own a full-sized one, but I have a deal with Vermilion University that I can use their larger Pokemon scanner. Neat. The scan is coming up just like the previous ones. Something about his form. It doesn't scan well. I've seen similar things in ghost types. Ghastly are nearly impossible to get properly scanned. He explained, and I giggled at the idea of trying to scan basically a gas ball. I looked at the screen he was looking at, and it did show a cute view of Mimikyu's disguise. But when it zoomed in, no, he's more ball-shaped than that. I explained, looking at the way the scanner interpreted Mimikyu's true form. What do you mean? Ceres asked, looking towards me. Well, whenever I feel him, he feels more like. Honestly, he sort of reminds me of Gummy with the way he's shaped. Of course, he can stretch out his limbs for Shadow Claw and stuff. Maybe like a tentacle. Like that shape. A similar shape to a jellyfish. Cuckoo. I love your shape. I told Mimikyu, who seemed a little uncomfortable with the fact I knew what he even sort of looked like. KKKKKKU. He made a hissing noise like air deflating and then leapt into my arms, forgetting the scan to snuggle me. I love you, Mimikyu, no matter what your shape is. I noticed that Ceres was writing on a pad of paper as he stared at me, and I couldn't help quirk an eyebrow at him. It's always good to take notes on how Pokemon interact with people. Bonded Pokemon often act far differently than a wild Pokemon, but being able to describe a positive bond between human and Pokemon does wonders on human desire to begin training tough or intractable Pokemon. Well, Mimikyu want to find someone that cares for them. I think it has something to do with their inability to, well, bond face-to-face with other Pokemon. They're very affection-seeking. Unless it's a Pikachu, they tend to have issues around them. Jealousy, from what I understand. Oh. Good info. Ceres cheered as he started writing more. Professor. You here? Oh. The door to the lab opened and in walked a blue-haired woman in a lab coat, a pile of papers in her arms. Krysa. Over here. Ceres called out, and as the woman saw us both, her eyes widened. Victoria Ferrous. Yes, this is Vicky. I confirmed, earning a blink at the odd word choice before she suddenly rushed me, stopping before she swarmed over me, but practically buzzing. Oh. Your conference battles were absolutely wonderful. Oh, I'm so happy you're here. I have so many questions about your dash. Chrysa, let's give that a bit of time. Introductions? Oh. The woman stood up and pressed a hand against her reddened cheeks. I'm sorry. Chrysa, research assistant to Professor Seras, it's nice to meet you. You too. I offered with a bit of a laugh. Professor. You didn't tell me you were bringing in Victoria Ferrous. I didn't know. He said happily. I invited her to visit during the conference. I originally just came to complain about the Pokédex, but Professor Seras is a good person. So I want to see what I can do to help his research as well. That's amazing. Chrysa cried out happily as she smiled at me, and then to the professor. But that aside, Chrysa, you were looking for me? Yes, we have the data from the Safari Zone. Excellent. The Kangaskhan migration data should fill in some data points. Cerise cheered, grabbing the papers, but then stopping and coughing. But that'll have to wait, we have a guest. Whichever. I shrugged, I wasn't in a rush, and I'd never seen a professor's lab operate before. Well, it's not a rush either, like I said, we are only just starting to get this system together. Unfortunately, there is just too much data that we don't have to properly get it working. Charisse offered with a slumped sigh. What are you missing? Can't you just get someone to get the data? The problem is that the data constantly changes. I can track last year's migration of Pokemon, and even some rare breeds, but where those Pokemon would be now? Not a chance. Oh, I see, you need something more up to date. Exactly. The technology is simply dash. Electronic Pokédex. I said, seizing my chance. What? That's what you need. Every trainer in Kanto walking around with an electronic Pokédex that transmits the data on Pokemon sightings to a central database. You'd have all the data you need, rangers would have all the data they need, and trainers would have up-to-date information on where Pokemon can be found, and of course, as it's a Pokédex, up-to-date data on what those Pokemon are, what they like and what not to do. The important stuff. Both researchers looked at me for a moment, Cerise obviously considering, and even brightening before slumped, and sighed. Unfortunately, the idea has been floated around a few times, but the expense and upkeep is too much for any of the big corporations to consider it. He explained, and I just frowned. Expense and upkeep? I didn't know a whole lot about Poke computers, but servers and data storage was, if anything, way more advanced than Earth. Gathering data like that shouldn't be an issue at all. Well, Kanto was a bit rural, so they probably just didn't have the infrastructure, maybe not the factories? Heh. An electronic Pokédex? It's a good idea. Chrysa tried to offer to me gently, but I was frowning because I knew it was doable, but... Yeah, the early Pokédex was probably a bit too early for easy propagation without someone like Oak pushing for it. But it would solve your problem, a lot of problems in fact. That's true. Cerise offered with a smile. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist, so I have to do without. Doesn't exist yet. I muttered, but shook it off, to focus more on what was going on. So anything else you want from Mimikyu? I asked, as I looked down at the Pokemon in my arms who'd just been happily cuddling with me while we talked. Oh. That's a Pokemon. Chrysa gasped excitedly, and suddenly the conversation shifted as I explained what I knew about Mimikyu to an interested researcher. Thank you. Victoria dash. Just Vicky, is fine, Professor Cerise. Vicky then. Well, thank you for accepting my offer. I have your number, and I'll reach out to you. I'm sure that someone with your competency with battles will help do a few things that my researchers couldn't do safely. Sure. It sounds fun. I agreed, as we stepped out of his lab house, and onto the large fancy lawn. Cerise was seriously mega-loaded. Expect a call soon, and I'll reach out to your parents to discuss everything with them like you asked. Thanks, Professor. It's a lot easier than me trying to explain things. I laughed, because I knew Mama would demand some sort of pay, and Papa would want assurances on what I was doing. Either way. I released Dragonite and leapt onto her back as she took to the skies. I could hear gasps below as they saw Dragonite burst into speed and leave the building far behind. I wonder if that brunette that I'd seen was Chloe? Either way, I headed towards the stable to let everyone out and relax, and while I flew, I considered the issue. I wanted the damn electronic Pokédex. For one, it eventually evolved into a smartphone, and I wanted a smartphone. For two, it was just better. Plus, I'm pretty sure Professor Ceresa's whole idea involved Pokédex data. The problem of course was, I'm not Oak. I wasn't a champion. Yet. Maybe. I'm still deciding whether I would even want that, and more importantly, I don't have that kind of money. I was pretty rich with the Milotic scales and stuff, but there was a difference between how rich I was and how rich someone like Oak had been. Or Professor Ceres. There was an itching feeling in my stomach that made me realize that I might actually have to do something about this. I was happy just lazing around and playing with my Pokémon, but without Oak here. There were things that made this world better, and the electronic Pokédex was a big one. The other, of course, was people accepting friendship evolutions. I plopped my head forward onto Dragonite's scales and just groaned. Pre? She called out, looking back over her shoulder. I don't know what to do. I told her, thankful for her control of the wind that she could hear me. Dragon. She rumbled, and I looked up and she gave me a smile and slapped her bicep. Just be strong, huh? Yeah. That I can probably do. I muttered as I sat back up. I still had time and I had the strength. It might not be easy, but doable? People do hard things all the time, just have to keep at it. Pre. She called out as she suddenly shifted down, and I grinned as we were already at the stable. She floated down and with a single flap of her wing stalled her momentum, so she settled onto the earth with a gentle step. Thanks for the ride. I know you were planning a rest day. I told her, and she just reached out and patted my head. All right. Come out everyone. I called, releasing my Pokémon back into the stable, each of them settling in with a happy noise as they went to do what they wanted. Blue Heart of course settled into the water and called out to me with a rumble happily before sinking beneath the waves. Vicky. Here for more training? Grandpa Roy called out from where he was sitting out on the porch enjoying the weather. A steaming cup of tea beside him. Nope. I just got back from Vermilion. I explained as I walked over and sat down so I could swing my legs off the porch. I met with Professor Ceres there. He's nice. My voice attracted some attention and one of the gummy woogled over to greet me, so I had a cute stress ball to play with. Is that so? A professor is a good contact to have. Well, I might do some work for him. With him? I shrugged, not sure how to best describe it. But, I ran into a problem and it's going to be annoying to fix. What sort of problem? Maybe this old man can help. You ever hear of an electronic Pokédex? I asked him, and he blinked, sort of considering it. I think there was talk about it. I think Sylph Company was doing something like that? He muttered, a finger scratching at his gray well-kept beard. Sylph Company, huh? I muttered, I wonder if I could get them to restart the project if they were considering it once. Or maybe they were still working on it, and just waiting for it to get cheaper? I'd have to try talking to whoever was in charge at Sylph, maybe urge them to get the Pokédex project going? It doesn't look like I've given you any ease with your issue. Not really. I admitted, but to sugarcoat it a bit, I sent him a smile. But you helped a little. I'm glad to hear it. He offered with a smile as he took a sip of his drink. This electronic Pokédex is important to you? It's probably the most important Pokémon research tool to ever exist. I admitted. Well, maybe besides Pokeballs. I had to correct myself. You think it'll be that big? People have had Pokédex for a long time. Yeah, but picture this. You're walking around, and a Pokémon is there. You've never seen it before, it's big and powerful looking. Is it a legendary? A Pokemon no one has ever seen before? Instead of just having a tale to tell when it runs off into the bushes, you have your Pokédex. It records a scan, or even just a picture, with location and time data. Suddenly that mysterious new Pokemon is confirmed fact. Or if you find a Pokemon doing something you've never seen before. Maybe a ritual dance, or something else, and they suddenly evolve into something new. My words were excited, and I continued to squish the gummy all the more as I spoke, earning lots and lots of giggles. I couldn't help but think of the Clefairy Moonstone dance at MT Moon. Hadn't Seras had some experience with that too? But people didn't even know about all the EV evolutions. But what if some kid had a Pokédex when their EV evolved into a Glacian? You wouldn't just have some random kid's information, but the actual location it happened. Humans needed to understand Pokemon. Our bond together was what uplifted both species. I see. I suppose that would be quite the gadget. Grandpa Roy admitted, and instead of the normal sound of old people humoring children, he sounded actually in agreement. Perhaps I'll talk to Leo. Maybe we can reach out to Sylph Company through our investments? If they do it, great. If they don't? I'll figure something out. Or someone will. I admitted that last part with a loud exhale. I wasn't the chosen one. Even if Pokemon literally had a destiny force of some sort, considering Ash was explicitly the chosen one. But I could do some things, and I'd do my best to help. Like with Professor Cerise. I might not be the Professor Oak that this world needs, but I could help the professors that could do bits and pieces of what Oak did until we had a whole Oak in the aggregate. I smiled at the thought. I didn't have to do everything. Just enough things. The small pushes forward. Thanks, Grandpa Roy. You actually did help. I decided as I stood up and swiped at my jeans. Is that so? He muttered, but he returned the smile I flashed him as I jumped off. For now, I still needed to love on my Pokemon. Things after that could wait. Vicky! Time to wake up. I'm up. I yelled back even though I was not in fact up. I blinked around my room, the sun was flowing in, and I'd slept like the dead. Mostly because of my cuddle buddies. Who UKKKUK? Is okay. Go back to sleep. I told Mimikyu, who'd been cuddled up to my chest as I slept. John? You can sleep as well. I giggled around a yawn as I petted Jangmo back to sleep and slipped out of my bed. Between Pillow, Mimikyu, and Jangmo, my bed had been warm and full of cuddles all night. I headed out rubbing at my eyes. Arcani made space for me, and I patted him on the head as I passed, earning me a cold nose nudging at me in greeting. Mama? Breakfast. Mama called out with a smile, placing the Cantonese breakfast set on the table and then pulling me into a hug. Thank you. I mumbled, sliding into the seat and yawning. Oh, is the sleepyhead finally awake? Mornin', Papa. I called out as he came in. He was already mostly dressed for work. Morning, Trouble. He greeted me with a kiss on the head as he took his seat. Lucario carried over 2 plates and put them in her spot and Mama's spot as Mama brought over Papa's plate. I glanced up and saw Riolu notice me mid-bite, and then she narrowed her eyes. Don't even think about it. I warned her, my own eyes narrowed. She looked down at her bowl of soup. I could see the thought flash across her mind, but Lucario was there looking up and Riolu instantly pretended innocence, and I relaxed. There wouldn't be any food fights this morning. Annoying brat. Any plans today? Papa asked me and I nodded. Zealous is leaving today. Ivy and I let everyone know, so we're going to see her off before she leaves. That's right. It's a shame, you'll lose one of your friends. It's fine. If I really want to see her, I can always just jump on Dash. No, Mama and Papa both said at the same time. You aren't flying to Unova. Okay, fine. I'll see her again. I'll probably visit Unova someday. Yeah? Papa asked, amused. Gonna travel the world? A little at least. I still want to go to Alola. I muttered and Papa blinked. Since when did you want to go to Alola? Papa asked, confused. I remember you mentioning Alola before you went to Kitakami, but you want to go? Well. Yeah? Didn't I tell you about Jangmo and the Kamoo? That you dance battled them and they thought you were amazing, and the elder Kamoo sent a Jangmo with you to be your eternal dance battle partner? When you put it like that, it sounds weird. I argued, but then went more serious. The elder Kamoo gave me something. Something I have to go to Alola to. Well, I just have to go there eventually. It was a promise. I explained, and Papa hummed a bit at that. This is the first I heard of this as well. I mean, you've spoken of Alola a few times, but I didn't know you wanted to visit. The island is a holiday destination. We could afford tickets for a family holiday. Mama explained, and I blinked at the idea. Well, I mean. Yeah, I do want to go to Alola. I need to talk to one of the kahunas about Kamoo's gift. Papa hummed, and I looked between the two adults because. Were they planning a vacation? I'll think about it. Your birthday is almost here after all. Papa eventually said, which just meant he wanted to speak to Mama in private without me there. Huh, sure. If you can't, you can't. I can always fly Dragonet Dash. Vicky, stop talking about oceanic flights, you're making me anxious. Papa demanded, and I nodded, surprised at his reaction. I instead focused on my meal, and everything quickly returned to a more sedate pace, as Papa asked me about my Alola knowledge. Considering everything, I probably knew more about Alola than anyone in Kanto. So I happily shared things that I knew. Chapter 90. Zaluz. I cheered as the large executive-style car parked in front of the school, and the door was opened. I could see Zealous look up from her lap, to see not the airport, but almost her entire former class. Then she turned, giving a betrayed look to her father beside her, who just waved her to get out. She looked mad at being tricked, but I thought the little banner with "Goodbye Zealous" that Ivy had drawn was a good job. What? I already told all of you, I didn't need to say goodbye. She called out, but her feet weren't stopping, and I noticed she seemed more emotional than she wanted to portray. It won't take long. I called out, and Kiba of all people spoke as well. Just giving a former classmate a Kanto goodbye. It's too bad though. If you had more time, I'd challenge you for the last time and see where our record ends. He called out, a pokeball in his hand. Kiba said they didn't have time, but he was raring to go anyways. Pfft. You never won a match against me, and that won't change now. Zealous called out confidently, and Kiba, to my surprise, instead of blowing up, just smirked at her. Then I guess we'll have to see each other again and see how far we've come. He decided unilaterally, and Zealous rolled her eyes. Both of them knew they weren't likely to see each other again. Zealous. Ivy charged in a bag in her hands as she charged right up to the taller blonde. Stupid Unovan jeans. Why was she so tall? Here. I made these, they're for your superior. It's grass-type treats. The bag was thrust into Zealous' hands, and then Ivy looked up into her eyes. No matter what, you were our friend and we'll miss you. And remember you. Ivy said, and before anything else, her eyes teared up a bit and she ran off. Oh. Now Zealous was tearing up. I idiots. I didn't want to. I'm about to go on a flight. I don't want to be covered in. Zealous fought it, but I realized it was coming. I walked up, and before anything else, I wrapped my arms around her waist. She fought me for a moment, but I was strong, and I didn't let go. Zealous. You're a good rival. Thank you for teaching me and making me a stronger trainer. I told her, and my own eyes were wet as she finally hugged me back. Soon Zealous was leaving tissues given to her by her father as the door closed and she drove away to the airport. I wiped my face with my sleeve for a bit and then stood up straight. I'll see you again. One day I'm sure we'll have another battle. I roared out as loud as I could, and everyone behind me cheered at the proclamation. As always, everyone loved a good battle challenge. It was sad though. Good luck, Zealous. No matter what you say about not needing it, I'll give it to you anyways. And this is where we input data for migration patterns. The older researcher explained as he showed me his desk. Ren. Did you get that data in yet? Krysa called out as she hurried past, arms full of papers. Not yet. I was showing Vicky around. I'll do it next. He called back and the two researchers went back to their task. Sorry about that. No problem. Want to enter the data while I watch? I asked, looking at the computer setup and piles of paper. Never seen a young trainer that interested in data input before. It's boring stuff. I've worked with computers before. I explained with a shrug. I actually like them, even if I don't have one myself. Well, I'll start working, and you can tell me if you get bored. He assured me. I looked at the blonde-haired man as he settled in. His Magnemite shirt told me a lot about where his interests lay. Just like the fact the other researcher's desk Chrysa was covered in Psyduck stuff. I had Pokemon stuff all over my work computer before too. I shook that off, hadn't thought of that in a long time, and focused on Ren. He was Ceresa's other research assistant, and today he was basically showing me their work, so when I was called in to help I'd know what was going on. I settled into a spare chair and watched as Ren started entering the data into the system from the pile of papers. It was basically a form of Excel. Pokemon Excel? I held back my own snickers at the thought. But he was right, it was boring. Entering dates, Pokemon group, and current location, basically creating data points. Ceres really was making basically a history map of where Pokemon were discovered all across Kanto. Everyone. We have a guest. Ceresa's voice called out and I looked up from the boring work that was getting more boring the more I watched to see Ceres enter in with another woman behind him. The fact she wore a lab coat like all the researchers told me what she was here for. Oh. Pinery. Hello. Ren called as he waved a hand over his head. He looked like he was about to get to work when he looked at me. You should go say hi. He whispered to me, and so I nodded and headed over. Ceres was talking to Pinery, the new woman, and as I approached I had to slow down and take in the sight. Your hair, it's meant to look like a Glacian, right? She seriously had the same markings and stuff in her hair. I mean, it was a bit strange, right? Who'd just alter their hairstyle to? Do you think your hairdresser can do Mimikyu? Or Milotic? Or maybe Dragonite? No, wait, Arcanine? No, I don't look good with red hair, dash. You know about Glacian? She suddenly interrupted my rambling, looking very pleased. We do have confirmation they exist. They aren't just a myth. Actual pictures. She started rambling excitedly. Vicky, this is researcher Pinery at the EV Evolution Lab. They're studying EV and their multiple different evolutions. Including researching how to consistently get those evolutions. Ceres said as he grinned at Pinery. We're close to a breakthrough. I can feel it. Someday I'll have every little girl in Kanto carrying around a Glacian, and I'll get to see them all. She laughed almost evilly, and it was only when Ceres coughed that she stopped herself. Sorry. I always liked Glacian, but Leafeon is probably the cutest one. I always wanted to pet their little leaf hair. I explained, and Pinery was practically vibrating. Me too. The few pictures we have of them are so amazing. I blinked as I remembered that most evolutions were random accidents. I opened my mouth before closing it. Vicky? Ceres asked, having noticed, and I just shook it off. Nothing, Professor. But I'd love to help your research as well, Miss Pinery. Oh. What a nice girl. I'm afraid we aren't really looking for dash. Pinery. Ceres coughed to get her attention. Victoria Ferrous is the girl that won this year's Indigo Conference. The one with the flying Gyarados and the Dragonite? Ceres whispered to her, and I could see the woman's brain practically reset. Normal trainers. But we'd love it if you would help us. Field work is difficult enough, but such a strong trainer would really save us a lot of time. I couldn't help but laugh at the abrupt change, and Ceres did the same. Well, there was that expedition you wanted to go on, that we've been talking about. Ceres offered, and Pinery turned to him with practical stars in her eyes. You think we can set a date on it? Perhaps, we'd need to talk about funding, and perhaps make sure the schedule works with Vicky? Ooh. Where are you going? Well, we have a few locations. But the best would be. You see, we've confirmed that Espion often evolve in a location on top of MT Moon. We've actually had 3 different evolutions at a similar location, and an Umbreon. What? I asked, really confused because that made no fucking sense. Espion was a daylight friendship evolution. Umbreon was nighttime. It had nothing to do with MT Moon. Indeed. This is the closest to a confirmed breakthrough we've ever had. 4 data points in similar locations. It's a goldmine. We've been trying to set up a camp at the location the trainers gave to us so we can try to discover the cause. It's probably not Moonstone, we've done extensive tests with that, but there could be some new evolution stone in the area. Isn't it exciting? I just nodded without saying anything because. Yeah, shit, this was annoying. My Pokédex in my bag was burning a hole in my mind. I had all the information on evolving EV listed out. Although I'll admit I didn't know for sure if that was all the EV that ever existed. The fact was, there was always the potential for a new evolution. I shook it off, and considered instead actually helping. I'd like to help then. When you head out. Oh. How wonderful. The danger of Zubat is one thing, but Geodude and other rock types are a threat to the equipment, so setting up any sort of camp on MT Moon is often expensive. Pinery explained and I nodded, made sense. Well, I'll start talking to the trust to get the funds, and we can set a time. I'll speak with your parents when we have a confirmed time, Vicky? Sure. I agreed with a shrug. Whatever worked. Well, in that case. Want to see my Glacian pictures? I have lots of EVs and their evolutions as well. Pinery started suddenly pulling out pictures from her lab coat and shoving them around. Seras took one with a smile that told me he'd experienced this plenty of times before. I happily looked them over. Eevee were cute after all. Happy birthday! The shouting cheer resounded through the room and I just flushed at the attention. I was 11 now. We weren't at home, or grams like usual, instead the party was being held in the clan compound. It was big. This wasn't just a small family affair, although there had been a happy meal in the morning with just Mama, Papa, and Gram. But I was part of a clan now. One that helped me, and had been massively helped in turn. And more importantly, I'd won the conference. The clan all wanted to celebrate. Grandpa Roy lowered his toast, and the clan all cheered as I leaned in and blew out the candles on the cake. This had been an experience. There were a ton of people I only barely knew packed in this room, but they all knew me. They were all related to me. I had a surprisingly big family. The party wasn't too bad really. Eventually, the adults slipped into the adult group, and the kids gathered in their own groups. I was unlike most of the other times I'd been here at the clan compound, the center of attention to the kids. When are you going to fight the Elite Four? Yeah. I want to see you fight Lance. Can she beat the Elite Four? They're super strong. Are you that strong? The kids all asked in a rush and I had to hold up my hands to get them to stop all chattering at once. I'm probably going to give it some time. I want to train more Pokemon, and there are some things I need to do before. I explained to the children around me. Most were young, but some were actually about my age. Well, if you fought like you did against Beth, you'll probably do okay. One of the boys said, earning a smattering of agreement from the group. Can I get a Milotic? One of the smaller girls suddenly yelled out, and the entire group went silent as their eyes all widened dramatically. Shelly. Don't Shelly me. I want one. They're pretty. She shrieked back, and that caused a lot of children yelling at each other. Before I could call out myself to get them all to settle down, Elizabeth was there and she started whacking heads with a paper plate. That simple act silenced each of them until it spread like a ripple and they all got quiet. Geez, all of you yelling like this? It's Vicky's birthday, not yours. Elizabeth reminded the little girl Shelley, who pouted but then bowed her head to me. Sorry. It's fine. I like Milotic too, after all. I added with a laugh. I don't really know if asking me is the best though. I don't really know the rules for it, I guess. The clan supplies a Pokemon to the trainers when they turn 10. Usually a Meowth, of course, but there are sometimes others. We don't usually let them pick though. She muttered, looking at Shelly, who just pouted at the older girl. Are you going to start offering Milotic? I don't know if that really, I trailed off. Not as such. She agreed. No Milotic as your starter. She told the kids, who all booed at the words. She looked at me, and I nodded at the jerk of her head, as she led me from the crowd. Shouldn't you be with the older kids? I couldn't help but ask as she pulled me out of the mob. Normally I would be, but I'm responsible for making sure the kids don't cause trouble. Sorry, I was enjoying the cake. She explained, and I laughed at her honest response. It's okay. I didn't mind. Shouldn't you watch them then? They'll be fine. Still, Shelly shouldn't be asking you for Pokemon, that's rude. She led me out of the main room we'd been using down the outside porch, where I relaxed as I could see my Pokemon all playing happily. They'd gotten Pokemon cake as well, and seeing most of them faces covered in frosting as they lay around the grounds in food comas was soothing. Gonna have to clean all of them after this. She commented dryly. Yeah, but I'll call in the Milotic and Arcanine to get them speed dried. She chuckled at my answer and led me towards the edge of the porch, before stopping. With the noise of the clan meeting room behind us, I realized no one would be able to understand what we were saying. Which is why she brought me here and asked a question. Shelly isn't the only kid asking about Milotic as their own Pokemon. So far, it's been very much a private clan head thing, but the adults don't want to ask. I think they're walking on eggshells about it. She offered before taking a breath and letting it out. Would you let the clan set up some kids with FIBA? Dad and I have been considering opening up a smaller pool where some of the kids can play with the Milotic and FIBA, so they can grow attached and start with a Milotic starter. I was a bit taken aback by the question. That was big. Of course the clan would want more Milotic, and they were strong Pokemon, so of course they'd want trainers to train them. Did I want more Milotic in the world? More FIBA finding their forever friend? Of course I did, but the clan still gave me complicated feelings. I looked up at her, and she sort of looked at me. We'd have to talk about it. But do you think it's safe? Kids talk. One might give it away. We're clan kids, we know to keep our mouths shut. She assured me, but I looked at her a while longer and she cracked. But that is always a concern. It's why only the head family know about the Milotic now. Why we haven't shared it around or anything. It's a risk. Yeah. I wanted to ask as well. Since I do already know. If you'd mind if I caught a FIBA or dash. I don't mind. I decided simply. I can't stop you, and as long as you do it right, I don't mind. Sorry. I didn't really mean to bring this up on your birthday. I was gonna talk to you another time. It's okay. It's better. I'd rather talk about Pokemon on my birthday than about when I'm going to go after the Elite Four. I admitted with a sigh, and she laughed. It's not that bad. You're still the winner of the conference. It's a big deal, she said, and I detected a hint of bitterness. You dash. Vicky. I'm not upset about my loss. You were better than me. I'll get stronger and win next year. Maybe. But that's not. Just don't try to comfort me about it. Okay? Sure. Anyway. Dad and Grandpa Leo will probably try to talk to you about it soon. So. Surprise. Heh, what a birthday surprise. I gasped in faux delight. I said we weren't going to bring it up now. She pouted at me. I stood up and despite being in my birthday clothes, which was a more fancy yukata than I'd ever normally be caught in, I walked over to my Pokemon. You got frosting on your face. I told Arcanine, who opened one eye and licked her jowls but made no motion to actually get up. If that sets in your fur, you're going in a bath. Arc. Okay, but I warned you. I told her, reaching out and stroking along her fuzzy ear. The cold air, nothing against fire, warmed fur. I stood up and headed back to Elizabeth, who was still waiting. I would have stopped by to see Milotic, but it was his evolution day too, and well, Dragonite was currently giving him his own birthday present. I shook that off and focused back on Elizabeth. Like I said, I don't really mind. Either we're family, or we aren't. I added as I passed, to head back inside. Presents would probably be soon. Gumi. Brave chattered as we took a break to eat. Yeah. I thought that was great too. I mean, look. I pointed out and laughed at the damage she'd done. Gumi with Draco Meteor. Right now, she was still a special attacker, considering she wasn't physically very strong, so it was the perfect time to develop that energy. I'd train the boys on it as well. Dratini and Jangmo would probably pick it up pretty quickly, but Brave was on another level. She learned moves much faster than the boys, which was exactly why I taught it to her first. I wanted her to be a good goal for the boys without them directly comparing the length of time it takes them to how long it took her. I looked at the craters that surrounded us and took a bite of my sandwich. Gumi snacked on her berries alongside me. Gumi on a plate. So cute. We can still work on it though. You're burning a lot of energy. When you shoot the ball up, it's getting smaller. Gumi. She said, sounding serious as she nodded. Brave was always big on getting stronger. Our relationship was still growing, and she trusted me at least now, but there was still a distance between us. But that was okay. The best way to reduce the distance was to get to know each other. Our friendship would grow with time. Want to give it another try after lunch? I asked her, and Brave nodded eagerly. Gumi. She chirped, turning to her meal and starting to scarf it down quickly. I did the same so I'd be ready, and when our meals were gone, she hopped a few times until she was in position. Gumi. All right. Gumi, remember to compress the power. You gotta keep it stable, now. Draco Meteor. I roared out, pointing to the sky, and Gumi glowed. I could see it through her skin, the orange glow of her power building up and compressing. Still a little slow, but practice would fix that. And then it clumped together in her center. Goom. She roared cutely and launched the small ball of orange energy into the sky. I stared at it closely. It still dripped off a few bits of the energy like the compression was failing, but it looked better, and a moment later it burst into a few orbs. The whistling noise of Draco Meteor filled my ears, and then they slammed into the earth. Yeah. You did it. I cheered, and Gumi woogled up and down as she cheered for her success. I quickly scooped her up and held her up to the sky. Gumi. She let out her laugh as I spun around. Sounds like a good thing? I looked up to see Elizabeth. She was wearing her beach gear, but she looked hesitant. Yeah, we're still working on it, but making progress. I'd say. She muttered, looking over the crater. What's up? I asked her, and she hesitated for a moment. I was hoping for some advice. She finally said, never quite meeting my eyes, but I felt myself get interested. With what? I know you gave permission. There's a creek me and my friends go to when we're done with swimming in the ocean. You know, fresh water. I've made friends with her, I mean. I know what she evolves into, so I was always nice to her, and you gave your permission. Her pokeball was opened. Fifibas. Fee. A feebah called out as it flopped around for a bit as Elizabeth reached down and picked up the fish, who relaxed in her grip. I can totally help with this.